The 2025 Minnesota Vikings read like an Avengers comic book. Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, maybe the best roster in the NFL, and a young quarterback that's won at every single level he's played at, all combined forces to take down maybe the most overwhelming evil power in the universe. The power? The Minnesota sports curse. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 8 team in my power rankings as we head into the 2025 NFL season. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into the Minnesota Vikings, who with that number 8 ranking find themselves inside the tier of my rankings that is titled, Should Expect to Win a Playoff Game. And I think a lot of people look at the young J.J. McCarthy, who hasn't played a snap in the NFL yet, and say, that's crazy. How should they expect to win a playoff game? Well, when you go out in free agency and spend a bunch of money to fill out what now looks like, as we'll discuss today, arguably the best roster in the NFL outside of quarterback, and then you say goodbye to your quarterback in Sam Darnold, who played well on this team's route to a 14-win season last year. You also shut the door on the Aaron Rodgers opportunity, and you turn the keys over to a 22-year-old J.J. McCarthy that, if you ask anyone around Minnesota, denies the possibility that he just might not be good. You combine all of that together, and I would say it's far more crazy to say, it's just okay if this team wins 7 or 8 games this year. Yes, of course, it's important that they figure out if J.J. McCarthy is good or not, but I'm telling you right now, it would be a disappointment if this team does not have a successful season and even, at least competes for a Super Bowl this season. And in today's video, we'll see exactly why that is. Before we do get started here, though, if you could take just a second to hit that like button down below, it's a free, quick little thing that really does help support this series and my channel. Make sure you're subscribed as well so you don't miss our remaining deep dives as we lead up to the number 1 team in my power rankings. And lastly, make sure you stick around towards the end of the video. Arif Hasan joins the Vikings deep dive for the 6th year in a row. Always one of my favorite football conversations every year to get Arif here on the channel, so you're not going to want to miss that. But let's go ahead and get started. As we do in this series, we go through the coaching staff and each position on the roster and begin each of those chapters looking at their offseason changes and asking whether they got better, worse, or stayed the same there. And that will begin here as we talk about this Vikings coaching staff. And as we'll see here in just a second, this is one of the best coaching staffs in the entire NFL. No need for them to make significant changes unless someone gets poached. And that was the case this offseason. They do lose Grant Udinski, who was an assistant to the offensive coordinator. He is now the OC in Jacksonville next to Liam Cohen. Not enough for me to say the coaching staff is downgraded, but as Kevin O'Connell continues to get more and more respect, he's going to have to continue to fill that pipeline of impressive young coaches, something I think he's more than capable of here. As we look over now to the coach and scheme breakdown, just the utmost respect for Kevin O'Connell and what he has accomplished here with the Minnesota Vikings. Year in, year out, this team seems to exceed expectations. That was no different last year as this team had a basically winning in 1 seed competition with the Detroit Lions in week 18. They end up getting the 5 seed as a 14-win team and forcing the competition committee to reconsider if the NFL needs to change their seeding structure because it was a little ridiculous that they had to go on the road in the first round of the playoffs, having had the season that they just had. But regardless, Kevin O'Connell ranks as my 4th overall head coach. And with O'Connell, most people's minds will first go to what he brings to the table as an offensive coach, and fair, we'll get to that. He's spectacular there, but he's also done such a good job building up this culture and the organization and making it mean something to be a member of the Minnesota Vikings. Every year, the NFLPA has players vote on the team report cards, which votes on everything from the weight room to the training staff to team travel to the coaching and every aspect of the organization. And since Kevin O'Connell has been here, the Vikings have consistently, quote unquote, graded out as one of the 2 or 3 premium organizations in the league to play for. And I honestly think we're starting to see that reap its benefits. Seeing the wave of free agents that wanted to come to Minnesota this year, I do think their reputation under Kevin O'Connell has become a big part of that. So he deserves credit there. That goes towards him ranking as my 4th overall head coach right now. But also, of course, what he brings to the table as an offensive coordinator, coming out of that Sean McVay offense, as so many exciting young minds have done, either out of the Rams with McVay or the Niners with Kyle Shanahan. But O'Connell, at least in the year 2025, is kind of the poster boy that, from a narrative perspective, when a team goes out and hires an offensive coordinator out of those systems, the line usually is they're hoping he's going to be their Kevin O'Connell. And there's been other years where that name is Mike McDaniel or Matt LaFleur, but right now, that poster boy is Kevin O'Connell, and what they did last year is a big part of that. His ability to move on from a Kirk Cousins and have Sam Darnold rebound in the way that he did, obviously such a big year for him. But I think it's like a twofold outlook for Kevin O'Connell. On one hand, I think he's very good at working with quarterbacks, breaking the play call and the scheme and his assignment down to a fundamental level that allows these guys to, trust the process and play fast within his system. That obviously helped Sam Darnold. They're hoping that's going to be a big part of J.J. McCarthy's development as well. But you just watch the tape and the way that O'Connell every week seems to be able to bring out some passing concepts that are creating open, easy first read looks for his quarterback to execute upon. It's impressive, man. He has a firm understanding of coverage tendencies, what plays he can call that will defeat those coverages, cause in many situations like miscommunications on the back end with all these zone match principles that defenses are running today, drawing safeties and slot corners out of the picture so that another receiver can enter that space. His ability to set plays up, find that, play action balance as well, and understand as well that like even if the run game isn't working, play action is still going to work because these linebackers have been coached one way and one way only for their entire career. And that is to stop the run on early downs. And even if the Vikings haven't had much of a run game, and that is really the lone criticism on Kevin O'Connell right now, is that they just haven't really put the fear of God in anybody's minds with their run game. But despite that, O'Connell understands it doesn't matter. We can call play action anyway. And just like all of the coaches in this McVay Shanahan tree, they're going to call a lot of play action. So as far as the offensive coach rankings go for Kevin O'Connell, as good as it gets for pass game coaching with an A grade ranking 1st to 4th. Now, like we said, if there is a criticism on Kevin O'Connell, it is the run game side of things. They just have not been able to establish a good run game in Minnesota. It hasn't held them back too much, but there's been times that it has. Last year, they had the best year in rushing DVOA that they've had in 4 seasons, ranking 20th, but the 2 years before that, they were 27th in both seasons. So it just hasn't been something O'Connell has been able to figure out, frankly. And when you talk about how creative he is in the passing game, I don't think their run game is very creative. I watch what Kyle Shanahan does, the way Sean McVay changed his run game to be more duo-centric. You watch what Mike McDaniel and Matt LaFleur are doing in their run games. So much motion and creativity to set up different looks in the run game and have successful run games. That's not really the case with Minnesota. Their run game does actually feel more like a regression towards the earlier versions of this system that were much more just line everybody up and, hit you with outside zone and block it up and let the scheme do the work. Well, defenses have figured that out in time. It's not that Kevin O'Connell doesn't try other stuff, but I don't think he has the understanding of the run game that some of the other great offensive minds do in the league. It's not enough to hold him back from my 4th overall head coach ranking. Again, what he does in the pass game is as good as it gets, and building this culture is fantastic, but there is room for improvement. Would love to see him, continue to grow as still a very young head coach and offensive play caller. to evolve the run game, and maybe getting a J.J. McCarthy more involved in the QB run game could be a solution there. We will see. But we don't need to spend much time on Wes Phillips. I don't think he is the offensive coordinator de jour. A lot of you in the comments have let me know that I have been misusing de facto versus de jure, and the proper term for someone that kind of exists in practice but not in reality is de jure, which is the case with Wes Phillips. He's not actually the offensive coordinator here. He's just an assistant to Kevin O'Connell. But he's done a good job here nonetheless. But let's flip over to the defensive coaching and rave about Brian Flores. I mean, at this point, what else is there to say other than he has a strong argument to who is the best defensive coach in the NFL today? Now that Bill Belichick has retired, I think a lot of people might go to Steve Spagnuolo in Kansas City. Brian Flores did it in Miami and has now done it at the same level in Minnesota with less talent in many cases. If I'm building a team from scratch and I get to pick anybody to be my defensive coordinator, you're going to have to make a strong case for me to pick anybody other than Brian Flores. And for him to be basically this team's assistant head coach, running the defense, allowing Kevin O'Connell to just set it and forget it and let Brian do what he wants to do on that side of the ball, who I think was a spectacular head coach that just had his flaws in terms of the Tua Tagovailoa of it all and getting an offense to complement his defense in Miami. But he doesn't have to worry about that here, right? He just gets to call the defense, and my Lord, has he led to results with this Vikings defense. And man, I'm not going to get into the details of his lawsuit against the NFL. That's for someone closer to the situation with, the ability to be more nuanced than myself in that conversation. But from the Vikings side of things, holy shit, this is the biggest gift on God's green earth that basically the NFL is likely blacklisting Brian Flores from a head coaching position when he, to me, is clearly someone that would be a top 10 to 12 head coach in the NFL. So for him to just be here as the defensive coordinator, not just elevating the defense in the way that he's doing, but we've talked about this with other teams. When you have a defensive coordinator that's now been there for 2, 3, 4, 5+ years, you start to develop a chemistry with the scouting department, with your players. You start to get that pipeline of talent and a scouting department that knows what you're looking for, that can really help create sustainable defensive success. That's what the Vikings have here for the foreseeable future. I don't know if and when he's going to get that head coach opportunity that he is more than deserving of, but at least from a Vikings perspective, I think I said this on my podcast, the Fully Inflated Football Show, which if you don't follow my podcast, I do have a podcast, and go check it out. But I think I said this last year that Brian Flores has an argument not just to be the best defensive mind in the NFL, but to be the biggest non-quarterback, non-head coach asset that any team has in the NFL. Ironically, one of those is also Justin Jefferson. But you stack up, would you rather have Justin Jefferson, Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, Patrick Surtain, Jamar Chase, all of those like premium non-quarterback assets, or would you have Brian Flores coach your defense, who for the first 2 years here took a rather mediocre defensive roster, especially in that first year here. Last year he had a little bit more to work with and got even better results, but he has really schemed up top 5 defense over the course of his time here. We've seen a lot of defenses with a Myles Garrett on it alone not be that good. Coaching can make that big of an impact when it's at the level of what Brian Flores is bringing to the table here. So he's just the craziest of assets for this Vikings team, and obviously a huge part of how the Vikings still rank number 8 in these overall power rankings, and why I said in the intro, this team shouldn't be laying off the gas. You don't know how long you're going to have Brian Flores here. That situation could change, especially as he continues to pump out phenomenal defenses every single year. They are locked and loaded on that side of the ball to compete this year. Now, on top of all that, we have got to talk about what the hell Brian Flores is doing with his scheme, because it is possibly the most fun defense to watch in the NFL, just as a fan watching football. It is an aggressive, live by the sword, die by the sword defense that has done a lot more living by the sword than dying by it in these 2 years under Brian Flores. And it's also fun to watch because nobody else in the league basically dares run their defense like Brian Flores. So the Vikings have led the league in blitz rate in these 2 years under Brian Flores, but just as any great defensive mind will do, he has made adjustments based on his personnel, and the 2023 defense looked a lot different than what last year's 2024 Vikings defense looked like. So in 2023, we spent a lot of time breaking down this unique style that Flores basically came up with, where it was a min-maxed approach. On passing downs, he was going to put everybody at the line of scrimmage, and he led the league in 6-man rushes, and they led the league in 3-man rushes. So you were either getting everybody, and you didn't know where they were coming from with 8 guys lined up at the line of scrimmage. They were going to overwhelm you with numbers, but also with creative blitzing schemes as well. Create some of that phantom pressure and confusion to maximize the efficiency of their blitzes. But then just with the fear of God built into the opposing offenses, they might just drop 8 into coverage from there and force the quarterback to think the blitz is coming, but then panic into a quick throw into 8 guys in coverage. And that mostly had success until the end of the season. Teams kind of figured it out a little bit more. Flores knew they weren't going to be able to do that again, and he comes back with a new plan for 2024. And in 2024, they, again, led the league in blitz rate, but stylistically, it was much different. Number one, they were 28th in 3-man rushes. So that idea of dropping 8 into coverage was effectively gone. But also, on third downs, the Vikings were actually perfectly average in terms of blitz rate. They still blitzed. They still wanted to put that fear into offenses that they might get that 5 or even 6-man heat, which the Vikings were in the top 5 or 6 in terms of percentage of 6-man rushes as well. So they still would send 6, but not quite as much. They were more comfortable rushing with 5 and certainly winning with just 4 rushers up front. But like I said, they did still lead the league in blitz rate. So on first and second down, they were coming at you. Led the league in both first and second down blitz rate. And that was a big reason why the Vikings were able to be 5th in run defense DVOA last year. Just throwing numbers at the problem, stopping the run on the way to the quarterback, making sure guys are active around the line of scrimmage. And then kind of with the idea of, all right, if we give up a 10-yard completion and we get a new set of downs, that's fine. We are putting a priority on getting to third down, where Brian Flores is that evil genius. And then when they got to third downs this year, with this reputation of being so blitz heavy, they're able to come up at the line, show all those heavy, 7 guys at the line of scrimmage, those crazy Brian Flores looks, which is going to force the offense to keep the tight end into block, keep the running back into block, but then actually being relatively average in terms of blitz rates in those situations. Trusting that with some better pass rushers, guys like Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard especially, we're going to be able to win those one-on-one reps and pressure the quarterback. But then again, using that scheme to your advantage to create that phantom pressure, bringing in like an Andrew Van Ginkel, who is the most elite coverage dropping edge player in the league. A Blake Cashman, who's a great blitzer, but an even better coverage defender. So, you're putting the fear that they could be coming from any direction. They might slide one way, and then you're dropping into coverage the other way. Even like a Dallas Turner picked off Geno Smith once. Like that kind of idea of, okay, we're still rushing 4. We have guys that can win with 4, but we're also using Brian Flores' mind with those efficient blitz looks to cause confusion and numbers advantages there too, where you're also getting 7 guys in coverage now to help complement a secondary that was the weakness of their defense. So that, I think, just logically thinking about it, is a more sustainable way to coach the defense as opposed to the kind of min-maxed approach from 2023, either rushing 6 or 3 most of the time. And I think for that reason, we'll probably see something similar scheme-wise now in 2025, though Brian Flores surely will make some tweaks and adjustments. as well. And then outside of all the blitzing stuff and the actual play calls, I should at least mention the way that Brian Flores has crafted this front. It is unique to what a lot of defenses are doing, although there are other systems that look loosely familiar to what the Vikings do. But the Vikings have really ran a lot of that 5-1, 3-safety penny front that got really popularized by Bill Belichick, which Brian Flores is a Bill Belichick disciple for, having been with him for 10 years in New England. But basically the idea of running a 5-1 nickel penny front with 5 members of the D-line up front, with those 2 edge rushers being kind of hybrid linebackers that can drop into coverage off of some of these blitz looks, having a core middle linebacker in there, and then having a safety. It was Jabril Peppers, Kyle Duggar in New England. Here it is Josh Metellus, but a big-bodied safety that is an extension of your linebacking unit and doubles as your nickel cornerback. So in other words, it's basically a hybrid of a 3-4 base defense and your standard nickel front, where you get a little bit of that extra, fifth defensive back, slot, corner coverage contributions, but you also get kind of half of that extra, linebacker in the box, like you would get in a base 3-4 defense. So from a numbers point of view, you're getting the guys in the box to stop the run and the body types to stop the run, but you also have an extra athlete out there to help against play action and, cover slot wide receivers and athletic tight ends and backs out of the backfield. So it really is a smart way to build, especially your early down defense out. You get a lot of that balance you need to stop the run and the pass, which those results, the proof was in the pudding last year, right? This was the number 1 ranked pass defense by DVOA, and like I said, the number 5 ranked run defense by DVOA. Now, that's not their only base front. They call it a little more than a third of the time. They will come out in just a true base, 3-4 or 4-3 type of front. And then just like everybody, they'll also come out in a base nickel as well, in more of your typical 4-2 style fronts. But as you talk about this roster and like the CB3 spot on this defense, it is something to think about for later on. They have questions in the secondary, but about 2/3 of the time, they are actually going to only have 2 cornerbacks out there, which is probably as few as anybody in the league, because they're going to be in those 3 safety packages with 2 corners instead. But there you go. There's your Brian Flores glazing. I'm a huge fan of what he brings to the table here. And it's just, again, just absurd that pairs with Kevin O'Connell and what he brings on the offensive side of things. Now, next up, we are going to get into this roster breakdown. Before we do that, I want to thank the sponsor for today's video, SeatGeek. Guys, especially any Minnesotans watching this Vikings deep dive, the summer months are fading and fading fast. Go out, get some sunlight, go catch a concert. Yes, even go check out a Twins game. I know the team stinks, but they're going to be calling up some exciting prospects here soon. SeatGeek has got you covered with the best prices, the best user interface. If you're familiar with the color coding system of this deep dive series, you know how to operate SeatGeek. Look for the green dots. Green is good. Red means bad. You can guarantee you are getting the best tickets, not just on SeatGeek, but market competitive prices as well. And even if you're not a baseball fan or a music fan, we know you're a football fan, and football season is upon us. SeatGeek is the best place to go catch your favorite team. And when you get those tickets, use code TFG10 at checkout. You'll save up to $20 on your next ticket purchase, and you'll support my channel in the process. A true win-win scenario. I hope your team wins when you go to check them out using SeatGeek. But let's go ahead and dive into this Vikings roster. We will begin with the quarterback and JJ McCarthy, and taking a look at their offseason changes here. They do lose Sam Darnold in free agency. Played very well last year. They have to prove that this is the right move to move on from him here, of course. But they do technically get J.J. McCarthy back, as he was unable to go with that knee injury he suffered in the preseason last year. They also trade for Sam Howell from Seattle, technically. Seattle quarterbacks swapping hands here. And then they pick up one of my favorite under-the-radar quarterback prospects, Max Brosmer, close to home there. Played his college ball, at least the final season of it, with the Gophers. Now, as far as whether they got better, worse, or stayed the same at quarterback with these changes, that's a tough question to answer. I said likely downgraded / to be determined. You look at what Sam Darnold did last year. Whether you like it or not, he played like a top 10 to 12 quarterback in the NFL last year. That's a lot to ask out of J.J. McCarthy. But the to be determined side of this is Sam Darnold was not a top 10 to 12 quarterback by season's end, right? He did look a lot like the old Sam Darnold when it mattered most. Is there hope maybe that by the end of the season, J.J. McCarthy could be a better quarterback than what they had in Sam Darnold as they hopefully approach the postseason? There is maybe more hope that could happen, whereas week one, this is likely a downgrade from what they had from Sam Darnold. So a tough question to answer, but that's going to be my answer as we head into the season. But let's break down J.J. McCarthy for what there is to say about it, which there just isn't much. You can basically just go back to my quarterback rankings video from him coming out of the draft, and that's how I currently feel about J.J. McCarthy. We have not seen him play in the NFL outside of one preseason game. But I thought it was basically fair play where they took him in the draft. McCarthy was my QB4 in that draft with a first to a second round grade. So taking him, anywhere inside the first round really was reasonable, more or less, unless he went like top 5, might have been a little bit rich, but they get him with the 10th pick. Again, fair play there. And the analysis on him is he's a tradesy player. He's an awesome athlete. He's got a pretty good arm. Top 20 by NFL starter standards. I don't think he's got some elite rocket arm, but he can absolutely sling it. But he was very much like a moldable ball of clay coming out. Someone that Michigan just didn't really ask to throw the ball a ton. They asked him to take care of the football, stay ahead of the chains. And then I would say the best of what he showed was in those third and long, third and pass situations at Michigan, which I think did ultimately get J.J. McCarthy into being a first-round caliber quarterback, where you could actually isolate those plays and say, well, when Michigan needed him to be a great passer and create plays and push the ball down the field and extend plays with his legs, he showed a ton there in those small sample sizes, because for the most part, Michigan was boat racing people and they didn't need him to do a ton in those third and long situations. There wasn't a whole lot of bad. There was one game, it was either Rutgers or Maryland. It's hard to keep those color schemes straight in the Big Ten. But he had one game where he had a couple of meltdowns down in the red zone. That was not emblematic of his entire seasons of tape, but when you're talking about a guy that didn't throw the ball a ton, those are going to get pushed to the forefront a little bit more, some of those head-scratching mistakes. But generally speaking, you're talking about someone that projects as hopefully a very smart reader of NFL defenses, a very smart decision maker under pressure, someone that can operate the structure of a Kevin O'Connell offense very well with timing, anticipation, and accuracy, and then hopefully create on third downs. And it really is just this tough balance of, okay, there was a lot to like. There was a lot that we still need to see from J.J. McCarthy in terms of being someone that can be the engine of a, high efficiency passing game, which just wasn't the case at Michigan, right? They didn't need him to be that. He was much more of their kind of Alex Smith was the common name you heard what his college tape looked like, but that doesn't mean either that you ask more of him that he can't handle it, right? It's just we haven't seen it at a high level. And then you also have to weigh the situation, the landing spot. If J.J. McCarthy landed with, no disrespect to these other teams, but the Browns or, maybe what Drake May had to deal with the Patriots last year. And it's not so much about those organizations, but if he landed in a spot with bad O-line, not a lot of playmakers, questionable play calling, you'd be a lot less excited about JJ McCarthy as you are here, where you've got Kevin O'Connell, you've got this infrastructure with an O-line and pass catchers, and we just saw this work with Sam Darnold last year. You are naturally going to be much more optimistic about his ability to work out, whereas JJ McCarthy, the prospect in a vacuum, is, I would say, somewhere in between what Trey Lance was as a prospect and like Jackson Dart as a prospect. He's kind of like the perfect middle ground of those two prospects. So you really can't draw up a better scenario for JJ McCarthy to land on the right side of the coin in terms of a first-round quarterback hitting. And if he does, he can absolutely be, at worst, a tier 3 good NFL starter, and maybe even beyond that. I don't know that he has like crazy upside. I think we need to see exceptional processing and decision-making and a little bit more aggressiveness as a passer and, frankly, accuracy on the deep ball. Those explosive pass plays were a little bit more few and far between at Michigan, but very young guy, a lot of time to improve some of that accuracy, even time to develop physically and get even more arm talent out of him as well. So a true ball of clay prospect that we just have to wait and see, man. Taking a hard stance on JJ McCarthy right now, other than just saying, well, yeah, I have full and utter trust in Kevin O'Connell, therefore it's going to work out. Like, I understand that side of things, but JJ McCarthy himself taking a hard stance on whether or not he's going to be a good quarterback in the NFL is and always was going to be an impossible flag to be planted. We just have to see him go out and do it. And needless to say, he is the ultimate wild card, not just for this team. I think you can make a case that JJ McCarthy and what he looks like this season is the biggest individual question mark for the entire NFL season. Because if he's really good, if this is obviously like Patrick Mahomes in year 2, I'm not saying he's going to be Patrick Mahomes, but you think of these like quarterbacks that sat and developed and then got their chance. Jordan Love, maybe another example. Like, let's say JJ McCarthy is closer to what Jordan Love was by the end of his first season as a starter in Green Bay on this Vikings team. That's a Super Bowl contender. But we have no idea if that's who he's going to be or if he's going to be Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, right? We thought Trey Lance was by default going to work out because he had Kyle Shanahan, and it didn't necessarily go that way, right? So it's far from a given. We will find out. As far as where I rank him coming into the year, I've got him as the 28th quarterback. I don't know how you can rank him much higher than that if your process is anything like mine. If you're trying to guess where he's going to land and all that stuff, that's a different conversation. We are ranking these players as they are now heading into the start of the season, so that's where he finds himself with this Vikings team, ranking 28th. And then I am also fascinated what kind of impact McCarthy could make in the run game. That hasn't been something that Kevin O'Connell has shown a ton of interest in leaning into, is utilizing the quarterback in the run game. But they did a little bit of it with Josh Dobbs. I thought they would do more with Sam Darnold, kind of evolving from the Kirk Cousins era, who obviously is not a factor in the design QB run game. So it's hard to say just how much O'Connell wants to tap into McCarthy here, but he certainly is capable of it and did it at Michigan. So that's something I'm very fascinated in here. And we also mentioned, like, O'Connell's had a hard time getting the run game going in Minnesota. That could be something that has some untapped potential in this Vikings offense. So you do see them ranked 17th to 22nd for the run game impact. That's more of a projection. It could be much more than that based on McCarthy's physical skills. If they wanted to tap into it, it could be even less than that if that's just not something Kevin O'Connell is fascinated in. But I'm sorry if you wanted some crazy hot take on JJ McCarthy here. You're just not going to get that from me here in this episode. It's a total wait and see. But it is crazy to think about the Vikings rank as our 8th overall team in these power rankings, where I do use a formula where I plug in all of these positional rankings and the coach rankings. And the quarterback is a huge part of that puzzle. The fact that the Vikings rank near the bottom of the league here as we approach week 1 at quarterback, and they still rank this high, goes to tell you what I think of the coaching here and the roster talent that we're going to break down here. Now, we do have to talk a little bit about the backups here before we move on. So Sam Howell gets brought in here. I'm just not a big Sam Howell believer. I understand the process here. He has physical traits to work with. This is somewhat similar to them bringing in a Sam Darnold to work with a Kevin O'Connell. His better days very well might be ahead, but his tape at the NFL level has been pretty hard to watch. He generated some fans when he started for Washington that 1 year, basically just coming out, doing his Jameis Winston impersonation, taking a bunch of sacks, running around, being aggressive as a quarterback, but his pocket presence is abysmal. His accuracy is abysmal. When he played in Seattle last year, it was hard to watch, but he does have the traits to technically work with here. Anything you get from him is house money. They have Brett Rippon, who's more of the journeyman backup type, and then honestly, Max Brosmer as a backup here in Minnesota, I like that addition quite a lot. He's playing really well in the preseason as well, but honestly, Sam Howell's more of a stash and develop candidate, in my opinion. Granted, he is on the last year of that rookie contract here in Minnesota. But Brosmer, to me, I feel like has much more potential this season to actually step in the event of a J.J. McCarthy injury and play through the structure of the game plan. Allow Kevin O'Connell to scheme up offense and allow these excellent playmakers to thrive. He has one elite trait, and that is his release. He has as quick of a release and the ability to kind of distribute. He even attacks the middle of the field, which Kevin O'Connell loves to focus on in his passing game. I really like the fit. I do. But in a nightmare scenario where you have to get into your backup quarterbacks, don't be stunned if Max Brosmer emerges as the QB2 here for 2025, and if he actually kind of plays pretty well. I don't want Vikings fans to take this and run with it, but there are at least glimpses of the Trey Lance, Brock Purdy scenario in San Francisco. Again, not predicting it plays out the way it did in San Francisco, but there's a lot of Trey Lance in J.J. McCarthy's college evaluation, and there's a lot of Brock Purdy, as a prospect in Max Brosmer. So just take that for what it is. I think it was a really smart pickup as an undrafted free agent for the Vikings. But let's move forward and discuss this group of weapons for Minnesota. And we'll start by looking at their offseason changes there. Not a ton there. I have them staying neutral at both wide receiver and tight end, but there's some moving pieces here. Brandon Powell, their wide receiver 4, is gone. They draft Ty Felton in the 3rd round out of Maryland. And then at tight end, Johnny Munt, their tight end 3, is out the door. And they bring in another tight end 3 in Nick Vanette, along with a 6th round pick in Gavin Bartholomew. But obviously there wasn't a huge need to shake up this group of weapons. It is easily one of the best in the league. I have this group of weapons ranking with an A+ grade, tied for first with 3 teams in the league here. Effectively perfect roster construction, at least with your starters here. You got Justin Jefferson, who I do put the crown on as the best wide receiver in the NFL. I understand his production wasn't where Jamar Chase's was last year, but he also didn't have Joe Burrow throwing him the ball, and he didn't get the target share that Jamar Chase did. But if you look at their actual yards per route run, which is one of my favorite stats for wide receivers, Jefferson was at 2.43. That was 7th in the league. And Jamar Chase was right behind him at 2.41, which was 8th in the league. And I don't mean to drone on about this debate. Both these guys, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, are the elite of the elite. And if you wanted to pick Jamar Chase as your best wide receiver in the NFL, that's totally fine by me. But I think where Justin Jefferson does get the nod is in the ball skills category. Both these guys do make just stupid, insane, spectacular highlight reel catches. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of the consistency, Justin Jefferson has a better drop rate by about 2%. And the contested catch win rate is better with Justin Jefferson, 55% with JJ and 41% with Jamar Chase. So you're obviously splitting hairs with the elite of the elite wide receivers there, but I do give the crown to Justin Jefferson. as the most complete, do-it-all, alpha elite wide receiver in the league. And just like we said with the Brian Flores discussion, Justin Jefferson is also in the conversation for who are the most impactful non-head coach, non-quarterback assets in the NFL. Especially, by the way, when you consider that the Vikings took care of their business ahead of schedule and they're paying Justin Jefferson $35 million, which is now $5-6 million a year less than guys like Jamar Chase and Myles Garrett and those types are getting. So pretty nice starting point with this group of weapons, if you will. But then you also have one of the better, I would say a top 10 number 2 wide receiver in the league next to him in Jordan Addison. And Addison's a guy that would be the best wide receiver on, 8 to 10 other teams in the league. He's just a really balanced receiver that I think is excellent as a number 2. Whereas if he were a number 1, you'd have a little bit more concerns about just how good is he in terms of, size and consistency and all that. But as a number 2, he's fantastic. He's a great route runner. He does make spectacular catches. He's super shifty after the catch. He can be a vertical threat. He can be a nuisance underneath. And he gets to do all that against number 2 corners. I think we did see the occasion when he, in 2023, did have to be this team's number 1 wide receiver. You look at that Niners game, he had to go against Charvarius Ward. There's reps where he gets pressed out of the gym because he is just, he doesn't have all of the physical tools that you would typically look for in an ideal number 1 wide receiver. But going against number 2 corners all the time with Jefferson next to him, super efficient dude. So you love that. He is suspended for 3 games. I'd be lying if I said as a Minnesota resident, I don't fear for my life every day that they didn't take this guy's driver's license away for good. I cannot defend his off the field actions, reckless driving, DUIs, you name it. I have zero tolerance for any of that type of stuff. So I'd be lying if I said he's my favorite player in the NFL. I don't think he's necessarily a bad guy. I think he's just a complete knucklehead that needs someone to take his car keys away. But I guess that's the biggest criticism on Jordan Addison. As far as, football outlook here, though, outstanding number 2 wide receiver that fills in perfectly nice next to Justin Jefferson. Then you got TJ Hawkinson, one of the better receiving tight ends in the NFL, snappy route runner. He really improved his ability to win contested catches this year. That was a bit of a frustration coming out of that 2023 season, was he only had a 32% contested catch win rate for, your tight end. You want that to at least be over 50, and that's where he's normally been. But you want to be that reliable red zone threat, that chain mover on third downs where you're going to box out a defender in the slot or up the seam and win a tough catch in a pinch for your quarterback. He did that much more consistently last year, 65% contested catch win rate. So you love to see that. He's not the fastest guy. He's not the most dynamic after the catch, but he's very good in those categories. And yeah, he's in the top 5 to 10 range for overall tight ends. And as now a third weapon, when your number 1 and number 2 are effectively perfect setups, that's how you get an A+ grade for this group of weapons. It's hard to construct a 1, 2, 3 setup as well as this. And then this is where you get into the debate of, their wide receiver 4 and 5 is, they're pretty thin. And yeah, if they suffer an injury, they would be more exposed to drop off. And yeah, when you have a knucklehead in Jordan Addison getting suspended for the first 3 games, they're going to have to work around that. But I have made the argument for the idea of having too many mouths to feed. You can reach a point where if you already have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson, any targets you take away from those 3 guys, you're probably only hurting your efficiency and making things more complicated on a young quarterback. To have a simplistic structure where everything falls in line perfectly here as it does, I think is a more healthy setup than to feel the need to work your way to some number 4 target or force reads his way. And that's really how this group is constructed, right? You have Jalen Nailor, a day 3 pick on a rookie contract, competing to make some noise here, and he's going to have an opportunity in the first 3 weeks to prove that he can be more of a, quality starter for this team. I'm not necessarily projecting him to ball out in those weeks, but he is kind of a nice, balanced, do-it-all player. He's a good route runner. He's got decent hands. He's good after the catch. I think, realistically, he's a quality fourth player that should never cost this team too much money in a contract extension scenario. And if for one reason or another they do end up getting to the fourth member of a passing progression, he's a nice piece there. I don't think there's really a need to project too much more than that from Jalen Nailor. And then they draft Ty Felton in the third round, who has a little bit of gadget play potential, someone that they could use on jet sweeps and bubble screens and stuff. Some of the looks that Powell got in this receiving game last year. But Felton's got some speed. He's got potential to continue to develop. I definitely didn't think he projected as a day one starter, and that's not what they're going to ask him to be. If he doesn't get better with, winning tough catches and running routes, dealing with physical contact down the field, he's never going to develop into a starter here, but there is absolutely room for him to do that. I thought it was an okay use of a third round. There were other guys I liked more than Felton, but it wasn't like some egregious reach either. So I do think between Nailor and Felton, you have, adequate options. After that, I will say this group is remarkably thin, and that is because of the Rondale Moore injury that just happened in the first preseason game here. Really bummed for Rondale Moore. I felt like he had a lot of potential as a gadget player to kind of plug in it as a skill set that they don't necessarily have. That is going to open up an opportunity for Ty Felton to do more of that stuff here. But definitely bummed for Rondale Moore. His body just has betrayed him the last 2 years as he's tried to find a good landing spot in the NFL. But I will say this, Lucky Jackson, I'm not familiar with his game. Tim Jones, who they bring in from Jacksonville, among 6 other undrafted types. I would think the Vikings have their eyes open for cut candidates around the league. Does KJ Osborne get cut in Washington? Does Kendrick Bourne get cut in Minnesota? Hell, how about our Kendrick Bourne pro comp who's balling out in the preseason in Mitchell Tinsley in Cincinnati? That type of thing. Bringing in someone that showed some good stuff for another team. Would be a little bit surprised if they don't look at the Rondale Moore injury and use one of those extra roster spots for a little bit something more proven where the depth would look much better here. So hopefully Kwesi and the Vikings can get that done, because if you do have an injury, you are in pretty dangerous territory pretty quickly in terms of depth. And frankly, the wide receiver depth as it sits today might be the biggest weakness on this roster, depending how you look at the quarterback room. And then the only other core pass catcher we haven't mentioned is Aaron Jones, who's a very useful member of the receiving game. Really nice hands, getting up there in age, but still can absolutely be a consistent and efficient contributor, catching passes out of the backfield as he always has done in his career. Then he can kind of rip through the uneventful depth. Josh Oliver's not bad. He had to play when TJ Hawkinson went down. He had to start, and he's a strong pair of hands. He was drafted for his receiving chops, actually, but has turned into one of the better blocking tight ends in the NFL. So he's got some speed and still even maybe a little bit of potential, but not necessarily a dynamic athlete in the way that Hawkinson is. But then you got Nick Van Etz here is a tight end 3 and a heavy personnel guy. Gavin Bartholomew is just kind of a dart throw on a 6th round tight end. Pretty balanced player out of Pittsburgh. We'll see what he can be. You got your fullback in CJ Ham, who will catch a few passes throughout the year. Your backup running backs. Jordan Mason's not a huge contributor as a receiving back. Ty Chandler can be an Aaron Jones backup in that sense, but nobody really outside of your starters worth bringing up for too long here. But yeah, it's as good as it gets in terms of roster construction with this group of weapons. And that's obviously a core reason for optimism as well on JJ McCarthy on top of the Kevin O'Connell of it all. But let's talk about the backfield here with more of a focus on the run game, and maybe if their run game can be a little bit better here. Obviously, we got to talk about the offensive line as well. But as we look at their offseason changes with the Vikings, they say goodbye to Cam Akers, who was a backup here, and then they go and trade for Jordan Mason, a really nice acquisition to get a little bit more size here, even a little bit more youth with Aaron Jones getting up there in age. So I did say upgraded at running back. I like that addition quite a bit. And as we look forward to ranking this running back room, I think this is going to be a pretty even split because that is what you need to do with Aaron Jones at this stage. I mean, not just at this stage in his career. You've always wanted to view Aaron Jones as a committee back, but especially at this age in his career, he's 31 years old. But we've seen this throughout the course of Aaron Jones' career, even when he was younger, when the Packers would lean into him as a feature back, as the Vikings tried to do early last season. He's a more frail back that will wear down. He has had so many carries throughout his career, going back to college, and he's a physical runner. He will take a beating if you try to give him 20 touches a game. And I think the Vikings learned that lesson last year. In fact, in the first 8 weeks of last season, Aaron Jones was PFF's 7th graded running back. Say whatever you want about PFF grades. No, they're not perfect, but their rushing grades are pretty damn good. And it's a nice reflection of what we saw on tape, where he comes out in the second half of the year and was a little bit more banged up and just didn't have the burst and efficiency that he did in the first half. And sure enough, from weeks 10 onward, he was PFF's 34th ranked running back in the league. And that hurt them as they got later in the season. That big week 18 game against Detroit, against a banged up D-line, just 10 carries for 45 yards. For Aaron Jones. Against the Rams in the playoffs, a team that if you were going to beat that defense, it had to be on the ground. They were not having it with their pass rush, but you could run against that Rams D-line. And just 13 carries, 48 yards, 3.7 a pop for Aaron Jones in the playoffs. So the hope here is you bring in Jordan Mason, you give Aaron Jones 8-9 carries a game, maybe focus more on him as your third down back, keep him healthy and fresh, so that if you can get healthy Aaron Jones at the end of the season, that can be way more valuable to your team as opposed to, last year he had 4 of his 5 best games on the ground came in the first 7 weeks of the season. So strategy-wise, this makes a lot more sense. Now, before we get into Jordan Mason, I will say this. I would not touch Aaron Jones in fantasy football this year, because of how firmly I feel about his usage coming down. And he is a guy at 31 years old now that, he can't keep doing this forever and has been banged up on and off. So this is a case where his production, I think, does come way down, but his usefulness for his football team, I think, will go up. And then you have Jordan Mason here, who's just an awesome addition. Now, he as well has dealt with injuries in San Francisco. He's got to stay healthy, but man, can this guy run the football. A speed train runner with good vision that's been a stud running outside zone, which this team is going to run a lot of. Someone with explosive playability that wears on the defense. He's a really good back that just hasn't really broken through the woodworks as like a star running back, mostly because of availability. But the Vikings being very smart about this, you can take everything we said about Aaron Jones and how they're going to use him, apply it to Jordan Mason and say, well, Jordan Mason's not going to get 15 plus touches a game here either. He's going to get 8-9 touches a game, and that will help him be healthy and available later in the season in a way that he hasn't been for the 49ers, at least last season. So it's a very healthy setup where hopefully you can keep these guys fresh, healthy, and just, at the peak of their powers throughout the course of the season. So from a football, like a real football perspective, this is a very good backfield. They rank as high as 12th for me, 12th to 17th here for the running back ranking. But I will say this, fantasy football, I'm probably not touching either of these guys. I just don't know that the usage is going to be there. And both of these guys do come with injury risks. If I do take one, I would probably want to take the other as a handcuff. So there's your fantasy advice out of this backfield. And then here as well, their depth is not very good. Ty Chandler just has shown us who he is. He has speed, and that's about it. You don't like his vision, and I don't like his creativity as a runner either. Even if he's fast, he doesn't feel like a guy that can make guys miss at the second level and really bring too much to the run game. Now, as an RB3, I guess that's fine. And as a kick returner, sure. And then you got a couple of undrafted types after that. But yeah, there is your Vikings backfield. Very good group as we continue to go through this very good roster. Let's now go to another very good group in this Vikings offensive line. Now, a lot of shakeup here. This unit has to prove that this isn't just a good group on paper, that they can put it into practice. But there are a lot of reasons to believe that they can do that. As we look at their offseason changes, they are effectively deleting their interior offensive line from last year. Garrett Bradbury, their starting center, who did play every single snap for this team last year, he goes to New England. And then basically their other guard, which between Dalton Reisner and Ed Ingram, they played exactly 100% of their snaps there. Both those guys are gone. And then also Cam Robinson, who they acquired to step in at left tackle when Christian Darrisaw went down with the knee injury. He's also gone. So there's a lot of losses there, but nothing that this team is too worried about. And their list of additions is as much as any team added to their offensive line in the league. They do get Christian Darrisaw back at left tackle, played just 33% of their snaps last year. They're hoping he's good to go and fully recovered from an ACL injury that happened week 8. And then they sign Will Fries for a massive contract from Indianapolis, who played excellent last year before breaking his leg early last season, but they're expecting him to be back and ready to go. They draft Donovan Jackson in the first round of the draft, and then they sign Ryan Kelly, established veteran from Indianapolis as well, reuniting him with Will Fries. And then they even brought in a backup tackle of note in Justin School. So despite all the losses, I do think their additions well outweigh those losses, and I did say upgraded on the offensive line. And as we look at this unit now, they come out as my 4th ranked offensive line. This, on paper, is a really special group, and it reminds me a little bit of like the Carolina Panthers O-line last year, where it was like, man, on paper, this looks like easily a top 8 offensive line. They just got to go out and prove it. And you're hoping the Vikings can do that. But man, a lot of reason that's going to happen. I mean, Christian Darrisaw, you're hoping makes a full recovery. That's the question on him, right? His health. It's not just recovering from a brutal knee injury, ACL and MCL tear, I believe. And he, as Arif mentions in our interview, he hasn't been out there in camp, so he's still trying to get back out there. You're hoping that can get cleared before the season starts and that he can be the best version of himself. I don't think they're too worried about it, but he's a guy that's also missed time in seasons past. So that's really the only question with him is health, recovery, and availability. On the field, he's a superstar franchise left tackle that got paid rightfully so. Amazing athlete, amazing run blocker, amazing pass blocker. I don't have a bad word to say about Christian Darrisaw, the football player. He has checked every single box really since he came into the league. And what this offensive line was with and without him last year speaks volumes about just how good he is. But then at left guard, this is your biggest question mark in Donovan Jackson. But he was a first-round pick and a player that was widely regarded as a high-floor guard prospect. I do think you need to be a little bit careful saying that. I have a lot of PTSD banking on quote-unquote high-floor players to be plug-and-play and then that not happening, especially on the offensive line for these rookies. So it's far from a given, but you look at Donovan Jackson's guard tape. He's got really good feet. He's tough. He's smart. Everybody swears by this guy's work ethic and his professionalism. I don't think he has good play strength. I think his play strength is very average for a college prospect and below average for an NFL starting guard. So that transition to the league, even if he played in the Big Ten, could prove to be a lot. There is a world where he is just not that good in his rookie season and gets thrown around a little bit. I question his anchor, though I think at guard, it's... he's better in a phone booth, as opposed to when he had to step out at tackle at Ohio State, where some of these longer edge rushers could kind of tee off on him. So I'm less worried about his anchor at guard than I was with his tackle tape. But he still has to prove that he can do that at the next level. And I don't think he's great as like a drive blocker in the inside zone run game. Moving 320-pound defensive tackles off the spot, I don't think will be his game. But as an athlete in wide zone, reach blocking, climbing to the second level, I think he projects very well there. So I think he fits their system quite well. And there's a lot of reason to believe that he can be a very solid weak link for this offensive line. I don't think he's going to be perfect in year one. In time, I think he can turn into a really good starter. And if that happens in year one, that's unbelievable. I'm not ruling that out either. It's just not a guarantee, certainly. But he's your biggest question mark in terms of talent. But you do get back to some more kind of injury availability related questions at center with Ryan Kelly. There are no questions about him as a very balanced, proven, good, kind of top 10 or so starting center in the league when he's ready, available, and 100%. Unfortunately, he's 32 years old and has missed a lot of time over the last few years. Not a crippling amount of time. He's still been out there, and like last year, he played about half the year. 2023, he played about 3/4 of the year, but history's starting to tell you that he's going to miss some time. And earlier in his career, he missed a lot of time too. But I still think this is a good signing. Even if you get 12 games out of him, 12 games of Ryan Kelly with a backup stepping in behind that is still probably better than a full season of Garrett Bradbury, I think. Now, they got to figure out who their backup center is. That's another question we can bring up because I think it's more relevant with this Vikings team than others because of Kelly's age and availability concerns. But yeah, I mean, if they get a full season of Ryan Kelly on the contract they gave him, that's an absolute steal. And as long as he's good to go, he's a plug-and-play good option for this team. And then Will Fries at right guard is a very exciting signing. Was coming off a breakout year in Indianapolis. Now, how much can you say a 4.5 game sample size is a breakout year? That's more of a question mark. But, dude, his tape was awesome last year. He was mauling guys in the run game for that Colts O-line. He was virtually locked down in pass protection as well. He just looked the part, and he had started all of 2023 and clearly is a guy that just has the kind of development tendencies, the work ethic to bet on as a 7th round pick out of Penn State. Again, friendly reminder, if you don't know who to pick in the 7th round of the draft, just pull up a list of all of the, eligible Penn State, Michigan, Notre Dame offensive linemen and just throw a dart. A lot of times you end up with decent players. Sometimes you end up with a guy like Will Fries, who he's on a trajectory, like he has the athleticism and the traits that he could actually be like a quality top 10, 15 guard in the NFL if he continues on this trajectory. So that's why he gets this big contract with the Vikings. It's a 5-year, $87 million contract with a lot of fake money on it. It's really a 2-year deal with 3 years of team options attached to it. It's a really smart contract that they gave him, hedging against the fact that his breakout last year was a small sample size, that he is coming off a broken leg, that they think he'll be recovered from. But if he continues on this trajectory, that's pretty fair money if you project out to 2027. If he turns into a really good guard and you've got him for 3 years of $21 million after that, which is all non-guaranteed money that can be converted into cheaper cap hits if you want, that's awesome. But if he isn't anything special, they can move on from him after last season with almost no dead money. So really smart contract. The sticker price on there had a lot of shock value. But when you break it down, again, really a 2-year, $35 million contract with 3 years of team options after that. Love that signing. I'm more optimistic about him, frankly, than I am about Kelly and Donovan Jackson, if you want my takes on it. Not that I dislike the other additions. I'm just worried about Kelly's health a little bit more. And Jackson is a fine player. If I'm being honest, I think he was drafted a little bit early, but still a solid options at guard. And then you got Brian O'Neill at right tackle, who's been the definition of consistency. I think if we made like an all-league, consistently good team, kind of, writing off your perennial all-pro, super-powered players, Brian O'Neill might have to be the starting right tackle of that team. This dude's just been a machine for like the last 6 years. Excellent run blocker, excellent pass blocker. Yeah, his pressured allowed rates aren't quite up there with your elite pass protectors, but he's constantly available. He's just, again, an absolute stud, an absolute rock to round out this unit. Now, we should mention the depth because you do have some injury questions here, especially with Darrisaw and Kelly. So if Darrisaw can't go right away and they want to play it a little bit safer with him, Justin School can play. I think that's a nice addition. You want to make sure you're giving him chip help and, factoring that into your game plan if he's going to be out there. But he is a good run blocker and has played a good bit. So, that was a smart signing. If you got to be a little bit more cautious with Darrisaw, maybe Darrisaw takes a couple weeks to get out there. If Darrisaw gets injured again, that's going to be more like a Cam Robinson situation last year, maybe even a little bit worse. But you can definitely work around it in game plan specific weeks for a couple of weeks. Walter Rouse in year 2, I'm still fascinated by. I'm not necessarily projecting an emergence or a breakout for him or anything like that, but very strong player. I liked his college tape. I thought he was a value where they got him. And him as a backup guard, I don't mind either. One of these tackles that always realistically projected better as a guard. So he's interesting. Logan Brown, an undrafted pickup as well, tested very well. So he might make this team. I don't know if they want to try and steal him on the practice squad and risk someone else getting him. But it's okay, tackle depth. And then at guard, you have Blake Brandel, who they did have to start last year. He had some good games, had some bad games. He's very tall, so he struggles to win that leverage battle. But they've lived in that world, right? So if Kelly does get hurt, could maybe Will Fries play some center? And then you just kind of resume with Blake Brandel, who they worked through as a starter for them last year. I actually don't know the answer to that question. He hasn't done it in the pros, but somebody would have to play center if it's Ryan Kelly going down. It depends how much they like Michael Juergens, who they drafted last year. We haven't seen him play yet. I didn't watch him in college, so maybe they do like him. And he would become a little bit of a wild card, Michael Juergens, with him realistically being their backup center. Because I do think Kelly, most likely scenario is Kelly's going to miss about a third of the season. If Juergens can just be an adequate replacement level backup, that would be huge, frankly, to survive those weeks. But as far as O-line depth goes, it's pretty average relative to the rest of the league. So there is your offensive line. On paper, this group is fantastic. It's a little bit harder to weigh the injury risk with Darrisaw and Ryan Kelly, who they're relatively optimistic about right now being ready to go. So I'm not going to fully ding them for that. That's where they end up as our 4th overall offensive line. But obviously, if those guys are going to get banged up, you would have to have some more questions about this unit, where they could be more of an average or even below average unit if things go really poorly here. Like Darrisaw could be unavailable, Ryan Kelly could be unavailable, Will Fries could just be, not what they're hoping he is after a 5-game breakout coming off a broken leg. And Donovan Jackson might struggle as a rookie. If all that happens, it's a bottom 10 offensive line. So I don't think that happens. That's a true nightmare scenario. That's pretty unlikely that all of those things go wrong, right? But it's at least something to stash in the back of your mind. Like if things go south for this Vikings team, on offense at least, other than J.J. McCarthy, it's probably because they got some bad luck on this offensive line. But let's round the offense out all together here. So they come out with the questions at quarterback there as our 14th overall offense. They're essentially good in every category other than that. So it kind of makes sense. You're damn near elite surrounding cast, near the bottom of the league at quarterback. It's going to meet kind of in the middle of the roads, at least with the passing game. So they get a B grade for passing game, 13th overall in that phase. and 14th with a B grade in run game. That would be the best run game that the Vikings have had. I think their running back situation's in a good spot. I think the offensive line, even if we ended on some cause for concern there's a lot more reason for optimism with this offensive line than to pump the brakes there. That can get you a pretty damn good run game. And then, of course, I think we end the conversation on this offense where it all began with J.J. McCarthy. I've got him as the 28th ranked quarterback to start the season. The hope is he's going to exceed those expectations, even if he's just the 20th quarterback, let alone better than that, 14th, 15th, inside the confines of this offense with Kevin O'Connell. Yeah, this is easily a top 10 passing game and a top 10 offense overall if he can reach those heights, which is, we'll talk about this defense here, but that's going to help this team be a legitimate playoff contender. But with so much attention being shifted towards what J.J. McCarthy is going to look like, and Kevin O'Connell being the face of this organization, the offense does get a lot of attention. But if this is going to be a high-end Vikings team this year, it really is about the marriage of that exciting offense with this defense that has been phenomenal and projects as hopefully being even better this season. And that starts as we look at their offseason changes with the defensive line, where they are getting upgrades with the interior defensive line especially. So on the interior, they lose 3 kind of role players, Jonathan Bullard, Jerry Tillery, and Jihad Ward. All were okay last season, but they are hoping to see upgrades there as they bring in some big name vets, not for cheap. Jonathan Allen, a 3-year, $51 million contract, and Javon Hargrave, 2 years, $30 million. 2 guys coming off of injury-riddled seasons, but high-end players just a couple years ago in their prime. They see a lot, obviously, with the money getting thrown at these guys, in these guys to still be big impacts there. And then they did spend a 5th-round pick on Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins as well. So upgraded at interior D-line, and then the edge is staying neutral. Really not a lot of change here other than saying goodbye to Patrick Jones. The second was a rotational player for them, played 39% of their snaps, but his loss not enough for me to say any sort of downgrade on the edge. But let's break this unit down. So I have the Vikings defensive line overall as the 8th defensive line in the NFL. They rank 11th to 17th for pass rush with a B grade there, and then also a B grade for D-line run defense, which ranks 5th to 10th. And those are very good ratings, but that is also with kind of looking at both Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave as kind of those yellow arrow wild card features on this defensive line, where I'm not necessarily ranking them all the way at their best there, a little bit more cautious optimism on who they're going to be, saying that the ratings that I'm giving them here could go up based on what they've done in years past, but could go down as well with them being more question marks coming off of injuries. So there is potential for this to go up or down with these D-line rankings, and that is where you will see the wild card icon on the defensive line here. I still think they will be a good unit with or without the contributions of those veterans, but they could be a potentially top 5 great unit if they can get the better versions of Allen and Hargrave. But we'll come back to the interior there. I want to start on the edge with this defensive line, where they do have a really nice edge duo here. 2 guys that play off each other very, very well within this system. And their best locked-in pass rusher is Jonathan Grenard. Was a really good signing for this team. A bit of a risk because he had kind of a roller coaster career in his first years in Houston, where it was bad year then good year, bad year then good year. They were banking on that trend stopping and him going good year to good year, coming off that 4th year in Houston. And he did. He had a career year last year for the Vikings. He was awesome, established himself firmly now as kind of like a really utmost high-end number 2 caliber edge rusher. And honestly, he produced like a number 1 in terms of production last year. Ends up with 84 pressures, 11 sacks, just a monster season. Was actually 2nd in total pressures among edge rushers. He was 13th in pass rush win rate as well. So he was beating one-on-ones. And honestly, I look at those numbers and I'm like, am I still too low on Jonathan Grenard? I mean, if he repeats those numbers, this is going to be reminiscent of like Trey Hendrickson, I think, where he gets the free agent contract, has a monster season, and you're like, 4th round pick. Like, not necessarily paid at the top of the market? Like, is it just a blip season, or, is he going to come down a little bit? And then Trey Hendrickson just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. If Grenard repeats, I'm going to have to eat this ranking and put him up towards more of the top 5, 6, 7 pass rushers in the league, because he really was that good last year. I don't think he's quite shown that level any other point in his career, though. So we'll see. You could argue for the up arrow on him for that reason. I'm going to stay away from that for now. I don't love to just throw the up arrow on everybody. I do want that to mean something, in that up arrow on those graphics is basically me saying I expect him to exceed my ranking of the player. I don't know that I expect Jonathan Grenard to, but I definitely will have to adjust if this is really who he is. Anyway, he does win in so many different ways as a rusher. He has outstanding power. He's great with swipes and just misdirection at times. He's a very good run defender. He's been a slam dunk signing for the Vikings. Kind of a win-win swap, as Danielle Hunter, I think, was what the Texans needed, and Jonathan Grenard, a little bit younger, a little bit more cap flexible, was what the Vikings needed. So he is their best overall player on this defensive line, barring Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave returning to their old form. But he's a very good starting point. And then you have Andrew Van Ginkel, who he is the perfect scheme fit. We talked about this a little bit in the scheme breakdown, but he's like the one edge rusher I have got to mention his coverage capabilities and how that affects his overall rating as a player. Like, within this system where they love to show a bunch of guys at the line of scrimmage, keep you guessing on who's going to drop into coverage, the fact that Andrew Van Ginkel has like actual off-ball linebacker coverage skills is outrageous. Like, you can drop him into hook zones, curl flats, play the flat, you name it, and he's got like ball skills, route IQ, movement skills out in space. They tap into that as much as you could possibly imagine for his skill set. So that contributes to a guy that is a super savvy run defender, really good at slipping in and out of blocks and knowing where the run is going. And he's a very good pass rusher. I think as a number 2, he's very solid. He's got a variety of different rush moves. He's relentless on stunts, his pursuit to get after the quarterback. He will make sure you feel his presence, even if he's not necessarily fully beating his man. So him and Grenard play off of each other very, very well. And then you have Dallas Turner off the edge as well. He's a wild card here as well, on top of those veteran defensive tackles, because very raw prospect, a first-round pick, was always going to be not a redshirt year, but a first year that he just wasn't going to make a lot of noise. I even talked in last year's deep dive about how it was wild that he was the favorite for Defensive Rookie of the Year, because I just didn't think he was going to play that much, and that played out that way. And it wasn't to take away from Turner, it's just because Grenard and Van Ginkel are good players, and we saw that. So still with those two guys there's only so much opportunity for Dallas Turner to get involved, but they will bring him in as a third rusher. They can slide Van Ginkel or Grenard or Dallas Turner inside as kind of a rush linebacker. Dallas Turner as well, very good dropping into coverage. So they'll continue to scheme him into rushing opportunities, and then he will be a part of the first man off the bench rotation. He should see a little bit more snaps and opportunities with Patrick Jones gone, and that's exciting. He has the most potential out of anybody in this edge group. Very Brian Burns-esque physical traits, not as developed in terms of the pass rushing tool belt as Burns was coming out, but that's kind of what you're hoping for, is a number 1 caliber rusher. If you can get something like that from him in terms of actually lining up, winning one-on-one reps off the edge in a way that they didn't really get in his rookie season, that's another big upgrade to this offensive line. And, coming out of Alabama, he's got run defense technique as well. So he can be a 3-down player for them as a rotational edge. So excellent third piece to have there. And then you're getting into pretty poor depth. Gabriel Murphy did make this team as an undrafted pickup. Definitely someone I thought should have been drafted. He has physical tools to be a rotational edge off the bench that can do a little bit of everything. So he's fine as an edge 4. And then you got, Tyler Batty, undrafted pickup this year, might make this team, might not. Bo Richter played a little bit for them last year. Cam Gill had to play for that horrible Panthers edge group, but they didn't bring him back for a reason. So it's really Dallas Turner, Gabriel Murphy's okay, and then not a whole lot else after that, which is fine. But then you go to the interior D-line, and this is where things get pretty damn exciting with the upside. Jonathan Allen and Hargrave are pretty much lumped together, honestly. Like, both these guys are very similar players. They're both much better as 3 techniques than they are nose tackles. And they're both like pass rush oriented veteran defensive tackles coming off different types of injuries, but certainly, question marks in terms of how explosive are they at their age. Allen a little bit younger. Allen is about 2 years younger, but 30 years old for Allen. That's why he gets more money than Hargrave, who is 32 years old now. But both these guys were top 10 at worst pass rushing interior defensive linemen in their prime just as early as like 2 years ago. Last year was where it really fell off for both of these guys. So while it cost them a lot of money to get both these guys in there was a lot of eyes on these two players, because if you can get some help getting after the quarterback from the interior, that is super impactful. And that's something that the Vikings have not had here, with all due respect to Harrison Phillips, who we'll talk about. He's a key piece here as well for the run defense. But these guys can offer something very, very rare, very, very valuable if you can hit on even just one of these two contracts. So it's kind of the equivalent of like the double dip strategy in the draft, where you don't necessarily know how these guys are going to work out, but the hope is, can one of these guys get back to something close to what they were? I think your odds of one of those pieces hitting is pretty likely. And then if both of these guys, who both, again, were good in 2023 getting after the quarterback, if they both hit, I mean, my Lord, you have everything you need on this D-line. Like I said, this is a top 5 D-line easily if Allen and Hargrave can get back to it. Now, I don't want to just entirely lump these two together. They're two different players with two slightly different trajectories. Jonathan Allen, like I said, 2 years younger, and he was banged up throughout the season. He was on and off the field. He's fascinating because, number one, he is a little bit younger than Hargrave, but he waited till like the biggest moment to look like prime Jonathan Allen in that divisional round playoff against the Lions. He looked like peak prime Jonathan Allen in that game, in the second to last game of the year. So most recently, we have seen the flashes that guy is still in there. He's more trending towards, I've still got some ball left in the tank. And again, his contract was more than Hargrave, whereas Hargrave, he suffers a season-ending injury week 3. So he's got a longer road to like getting back to shape, proving that he still has that twitch in there. So just different kind of trajectories there in a sense. But really, in terms of skill set, these guys are pretty damn close. Twitchy players, can win with power, can win with some cross-facing finesse as well. And both of these guys uniquely have not graded out well as run defenders throughout their career. I do think in this system, they can get better run defense out of these guys because Harrison Phillips is going to play the nose tackle. They play that 5-man front, and they're really good at getting these undersized DNs, guys like Jalen Redmond last year. Jonathan Bullard graded out really well for this team in run defense last year. This scheme does a lot of favors towards maybe lighter defensive tackles like an Allen, like a Javon Hargrave. Not that they're tragically undersized or anything, but getting these guys that maybe do struggle against double teams a little bit more in a position where they can shoot gaps, blitz on early downs, be themselves. I actually think we could see something close to career years in terms of run stops and impact in the run game from both Allen and Hargrave in this system, especially as we turn our eyes now to the other starting defensive tackle in Harrison Phillips, who is the nose tackle here. And what's funny about Phillips is he's listed at about the same size as Jonathan Allen, 6'3", 307, whereas Allen is 6'3", 300. But in terms of stockiness and sinking their hips and holding the point of attack against double teams, completely different idea. Harrison Phillips is just a boulder in the run game. Good instincts, gets off blocks. He is the biggest asset towards the run defense in terms of he brings something to the table that it's hard to find in the NFL. You do wish he was a little bit bigger to like absorb some of the tough asks that he gets in this run game, but his ability to help this team get into pass rush downs where he'll come off the field and then you're either rushing with 5 guys with Dallas Turner out there or you're rushing with these 4. He's going to play a very critical role. And as far as the Vikings ranking inside the top 10 for run defense, he's a big contributor there. So, all these guys have their hats that they wear for this scheme. And now, especially with some pass rushing 3 techniques, this could be unbelievable and really unlock a third level in terms of what Brian Flores can do. We might see more 5-man rushes than we've seen here. They were more 6 or 4 last year. Maybe the next evolution is getting after it with 5-man rushes, focusing on the D-line with twists and stunts. Who knows? Brian Flores, much more creative defensive mind than me, obviously. But that's just an excellent group to have there. We got to talk about the rest of the interior D-line depth, though. So Jalen Redmond ate up some really impressive run defense snaps, undersized guy, but like I said, he is schemed up well, not having to take on a ton of double teams with how they craft their front. So you feel good about him as well, getting in the mix there, doing some of the dirty work there as kind of a heavy-handed hybrid end. And then all the rest of these guys, I mean, at least Levi Drake Rodriguez and Tyrion Ingram Dawkins are in that image of the hybrid end. Jonathan Harris as well is undersized. He's played a decent bit in the league. And then they got kind of 3 undrafted types. I would love for this team to have more of an actual nose tackle depth piece, but there's only so many of those guys to go around. Kind of wish this team never moved on from Kairos Tonga. Would be like the perfect guy to plug into this D-line. But you got to keep Harrison Phillips healthy for that role, but that hasn't been a problem for him, knock on wood. As long as he's out there, all these guys will just kind of move in and out around his gravity in the defensive line. But yeah, very good group there, obviously. And then you get to the linebackers, another good group to break down here. But first, let's look at their offseason changes. Nothing too substantial here. They say goodbye to veteran Kamu Kruger-Hill. They also released Brian Asamoah, who I didn't even list there because he didn't even play for this team, but a failed member of that brutal draft class from Kwesi. Hopefully they're trending in the right direction with recent drafts here. Free agency has really saved their ass in the front office, but they did add Eric Wilson back, who went to Green Bay, but played well as a backup for Green Bay, and he's familiar here, so it's a nice backup addition. And then they did draft Kobe King as well out of Penn State in the 6th round, with Eric Wilson being a pretty quality backup by NFL standards, and the fact that Blake Cashman, as much as I love him, does miss some time. Having a quality backup there in Eric Wilson, I think, will be useful. They had some rough defensive outings in the 3 games that Blake Cashman missed last year. I think you're a little bit more insulated there in the likely event that happens with Eric Wilson. So I did say slightly upgraded at linebacker. But this is a very good unit. Again, they rank kind of inside the top 10 with very balanced rankings, similar to the D-line, and similar to the D-line in that they have a couple different skill sets, and Brian Flores knows how to deploy these guys to get the most out of their skill sets and limit their weaknesses all the same. So they rank as 5th to 6th with a B grade for overall linebacker, 4th to 7th in coverage, 7th to 14th in run defense, and again, B grades across the board. And basically how this shakes down comes back to the scheme conversation. So Blake Cashman is your LB1, set it and forget it. And then you have essentially a rotation between Avon Pace and Josh Metellus as your second linebacker. So you're going to get a decent amount of either base 3-4 defenses or 4-3 defenses, where Avon Pace will be out there as the second linebacker. And then you'll get your base nickel defenses as well. And those make up about 60% of their snaps. And that's where Avon Pace will come in as your LB2 next to Blake Cashman. And then you have the other kind of 35 to 40% of snaps, which are your dime defensive looks, where they actually take Avon Pace off the field. And Josh Metellus plays that bandit linebacker / slot corner role, mostly in those 5-1 penny big nickel looks that we described in the scheme breakdown. So you have to bring Josh Metellus into the mix for the linebacker breakdown. In fact, he played 51% of his snaps as a linebacker, because even in some of his safety snaps, he's coming into the box in their nickel defense where Von Pace comes off the field then too, and Metellus can be like a big nickel actual linebacker. But anyway, let's start where it all focuses, and that's with Blake Cashman. Unbelievable signing. He comes home to Minnesota, where he played his high school ball against my high school rival, Eden Prairie. But just never wrong, just early on this channel, I suppose. I have gotten the opportunity to take some victory laps on Blake Cashman about 3 years too late. I had a first to second round grade on Blake Cashman, about the same grade on Devin Bush in that draft class, where Devin Bush was the 10th overall pick. I had Blake Cashman, basically identical grades on him. And I liked Blake Cashman almost as much as I liked Devin White in that draft class, who was the 4th overall pick. So I was on to something in the sense that I was much higher on Blake Cashman and lower on those other two guys than sort of consensus. And here we are in the year 2025. The only good player out of that group is Blake Cashman. And Blake Cashman is now a top 10 linebacker in the NFL easily. And frankly, Cashman's another one of these guys, kind of like Jonathan Grenard, another Texans free agent signing last year, where you could argue that the up arrow should even be on Blake Cashman. Just his second year as a full-time starter here last year with the Vikings. I mean, that could be some kind of backdoor upside that I'm not even indicating in this series with a couple guys I do still like with Grenard and Blake Cashman. But even if he is just what he was last year, which is the realistic outlook on him, you're talking about a legitimate Pro Bowl candidate, at least in the sense of like someone that fans should be voting for the Pro Bowl, if only it worked that way. But a do-it-all, athletic, like three-way linebacker in the sense that excellent cover player, great speed, great instincts, always had that going back to Minnesota. It's the core reason I liked him so much, just a genuine understanding of route combinations, where to be in the right place at the right time, how to kind of drift with the flow of traffic and take throwing windows away. Excellent in that regard. Heat-seeking missile in run defense, can blow you up at the line of scrimmage, can get off blocks, super high IQ player. And then he's a phenomenal blitzer as well inside this system. So such a dynamic signing. Downside on him is he's a little bit more fragile. He misses time. That's why he originally fell in the draft. That's why it took him so long to get that playing time. And honestly, that's why the Texans let him go. They were afraid of his medicals. So got to keep him healthy. He's mostly been healthy the last 2 years, just missed a few games here or there. So I didn't necessarily put the medical check concern on him. It's just something to be aware of with him. But he's an excellent starting point for this linebacking group. Then you got a Von Pace, excellent part of this rotation next to Blake Cashman. A little bit more of a one-dimensional player, but he's a difference maker for how they use him. So number one, as a run defender, when they do play like full base defense and when he's out there, he is just so instinctive against the run. I don't even know how he gets away with what he does, but we saw it as a pass rusher coming out of Cincinnati. And we saw this in his run defense tape at Cincinnati too. He's so unconventional. He's like 5'11", 230 pounds soaking wet, but he is so savvy at getting off of blocks, whether it's as a blitzer or in the run game, and getting around blocks, really, like just natural bend and quickness, and just moves to work around blockers. So he finds the ball, he gets involved. He's got tiny arms. He misses a bunch of tackles. He's often hitting backs at awkward angles where he's dipping under a blocker just to get an arm on a guy. So his missed tackle rate's really low. He's not the perfect run defender, but he's usually impacting the run one way or another. And you'll occasionally get him making mistakes in terms of blowing gap lanes and leaving some stuff exposed there. But overall, he makes his presence felt there. He's a phenomenal blitzer when they do play him on third downs. And then the main knock on him is range in coverage. He showed some real bad tape last year in coverage that, frankly, I didn't see at Cincinnati and in his first year as an undrafted pickup for this team. I think he can turn it back around, but teams really were able to expose his coverage lanes off of play action or whatever it was. For one reason or other this year, guys were getting open behind him. He wasn't looking in coverage in the same sense that I've seen him do in the past, so maybe he can bounce back there, but right now, it was really bad last year. Playing a pretty limited role with how they rotate these guys and missing 6 games. He allowed 292 yards and a reception percentage of 83% into his coverage last year, including 2 touchdowns allowed credited into his coverage, which can be iffy at times, but I believe it. Like he was harder to watch this year in coverage, so hopefully he can bounce back in that regard, but definitely some concerning tape out there. But it's certainly not the end of the world because they do rotate him off the field for a lot of third downs. And it should also be mentioned, like, with the idea that this team was a first and second down blitz heavy team and then backed off the blitz on third downs a little bit more when he was actually coming off the field a little more, that plays into his total like psychotic gap shooting mentality really well as well with the scheme. But yeah, you got to talk about Josh Metellus. He's actually like an okay-ish run defending linebacker. He's only listed about 208, 210 pounds, but I think he plays a lot stronger than that. He, like, as far as safeties are concerned, there's a very short list of guys that I would say can actually take on blocks, shed, and get involved around the line of scrimmage. He's not perfect at it at that size, but very, very good. He's a secure tackler. But most of his run defense stuff is coming from the backside as that kind of overhang, strong, like true bandit, strong safety. So he's not meeting a ton of guys in the hole. He's more shooting gaps from the backside or taking on tight ends. But it is what he can do as a coverage linebacker in the middle of the field where he's much better than someone like Avon Pace. He's actually not like great at it considering he is a safety. Like his coverage instincts across the board are just average. So even if he moves really well for a linebacker, it's still not amazing, but he definitely is better than Avon Pace as a coverage player on third downs. So those two guys play off each other really well within this unique system, and then Blake Cashman is your heartbeat there. And then, yeah, Eric Wilson, we kind of hit on him already, like good backup depth, similar physical profile, brand of football to Blake Cashman. So as a backup, you know, if you got to get 3 starts from him, should be pretty good there. And then Kobe King, 6th-round pick, very stiff, very slow linebacker that was maybe the best linebacker in this draft at actually getting off of blocks. His raw block shedding assessment was the best in this very poor linebacker class, I think. But that's about all he can do. Just not super instinctive in terms of run defense and just struggles to move. So I see him more as a backup and more of an early down backup, which frankly in the Avon Pace role technically would be a good backup, even though their styles are very, very different. And then everybody else is like undrafted competition. They didn't keep a lot of linebackers last year. I think they'll probably just keep 4. And then again, Metellus kind of doubles as a linebacker there as well. So yeah, very, very fun linebacker group. We've got really top 10 units, both with the D-line and the linebackers. But some more questions as we go to the secondary, and they're seeing some shakeup here as we look at the offseason changes with the secondary. So at cornerback, they lose Stephon Gilmore, who definitely showed his age last year, but wasn't tragically terrible. Shaq Griffin was maybe even a little bit better than Stephon Gilmore, played 50% of their snaps, and then Fabian Moreau also played 9% of their snaps. And then as far as additions go, they bring in Isaiah Rodgers, post-gambling suspension and playing for that very deep Eagles secondary last year. They did sign Jeff Okudah, who looks like he's going to start this year. And then Mekhi Blackman also makes his return from injury, wasn't able to play any snaps last year. So, you know, Okudah and Blackman were unsubstantial additions for me. Isaiah Rodgers is a very good addition. I think one Isaiah Rodgers to the combination of Gilmore, Griffin, and Moreau, it's pretty much neutral to me. You could argue for like to be determined. There's definitely a window for this cornerback group to be upgraded from what it was last year, but certainly not like massive additions in that group. And then at safety, I did say downgraded here. They do lose Cam Bynum. I think like process-wise, I agree with not paying Cam Bynum $15 million a year, but he was a very steady hand at safety that they didn't really replenish. What they did was extend the player that is hoping to fill into that role in Theo Jackson, who's hardly played here. So until proven otherwise, that is downgraded at safety. But shakeup in the secondary nonetheless. Let's get into it. So before we break these guys down, I have this Vikings secondary as really the weakest unit on this team outside of the, polarizing quarterback assessment. But I have them ranking 23rd to 25th in the secondary. And honestly, There's a little bit of upside to be better than that, but not a ton. I think this secondary probably is what it is, and you're leaning on Brian Flores and the front to make the core impact for this defense, and just hoping that you're not a liability on the back end. Frankly, if this team hovers around that and they are the 23rd best secondary with the rest of the defense where it's at, they should be just fine. But let's start with their cornerbacks. So they bring Byron Murphy back. He gets a big payday. Good for him. He's been underpaid, at least on that first contract with Minnesota. And he gets $19 million a year here. And he is a very, very steady, kind of like high end 2, low end 1. He's not the fastest guy. He's not the biggest guy. He's certainly not like shut down in coverage. You're not going to have him like go press man on an opposing team's number 1 wide receiver and expect, good success there. But extremely heady player, changes games with his ball skills and zone IQ. When you're heating guys up and running some of these confusing blitz looks on the back end, Byron Murphy understands where quarterbacks' hot reads are going to go, where they're going to try to beat the blitz that they're in, and he's very heady and advantageous to make you pay double for any mistake that you make by getting interceptions. So we saw that last year with a 6 interception season. But on the opposite end of that, he did allow the 6th most yards into his coverage as any corner in the league last year. So it's not all perfect with him. Ideally, he's probably a number 2 for you, but as your number 1, you can certainly live with that. But it does get much more shaky after that. So you have Isaiah Rodgers. Really like this signing. This is where the upside comes with Rodgers. I already give him a very respectable 77 rating there as a good starting number 2 corner. So I don't necessarily put the up arrow on him, but I did put the eyes on him in the sense that I'm just very interested to see what like a full year as an outside corner with a team kind of showing faith in him post-gambling suspension in a state where gambling is illegal, what that could mean for him, because he has crazy speed. He's got ball skills. There's a lot of Byron Murphy to his game with some of the interceptions he's shown going back to his time with the Colts. He's physical as well. He's a smaller player. And once they really identified him as an outside corner, it worked well because, as a slot guy, we've seen this around the league. Teams trying to get bigger and bigger in the slot, and more of the undersized guys are actually making their way outside, which, a little bit of that applies to Byron Murphy too. But getting him kind of use his athleticism out in space, and off zone a lot more, where he's not necessarily taking on blockers at the line of scrimmage. So he's able to just basically dodge blockers in space, and then he's physical at the tackle point. So, as that outside corner, I like what they could be getting here in Isaiah Rodgers. And he played well in Philadelphia last year too, 420 snaps, reception percentage allowed of 50%, like really good coverage metrics. He had 6 pass breakups last year on just 270 coverage snaps. That's like 1 per game, basically, if you break it all down into like starting reps. But you can understand why his playing time was more limited there, because, a lot of his playing time was earlier in the year before Cooper DeJean got back out there, and then they had Darius Slay, they had Quinyon Mitchell. So, much more limited playing time, but very good when he played. I think this is a very smart signing, getting a guy that's still cheaper because he got suspended for gambling. Whereas had that never happened, he might have been on a skyrocket trajectory and kind of been the answer as Indianapolis's number 1 corner. It was really trending that way before the suspension. So definitely an exciting signing. Not necessarily proven quite yet as a bona fide stud, but I'm not worried about it, and I'm more excited about it for sure than any form of worry, if that makes sense. But I am worried about CB3. Now, it is worth noting that Minnesota's CB3 is going to play less than probably any team's CB3 in the league because of how they use those 3 safety packages. But you're still talking about about 55-60% of their snaps. We're going to be having Jeff Okudah or any of these other guys that are kind of in the mix as the other corner. And okay, Jeff Okudah has been really bad in the NFL. He's a physical, theoretically smart player, but that hasn't led to like results in zone heavy defenses. Like, Atlanta and Houston last year. Not that there was a ton of opportunities to play in Houston last year, but it just hasn't been there, right? So they pick him up on a one-year Band-Aid, the definition of a contract that you wouldn't get if you weren't drafted that high. We talk about this with Arif and what there could be there, and that interview is coming up very soon. So I will push that aside if you want to hear more about Jeff Okudah. But I'm concerned about it nonetheless when he's out there, that teams will just look his way and pick on him. And if that happens, I think they're going to open the door back up for this competition, whereas right now it does look like his job. But Mekhi Blackmon, it was a question if he was going to win this job coming off the season-ending injury last year. Showed flashes running a lot of man coverage in his first season. But as far as zone coverage, a lot to learn there, and clearly hasn't had a great offseason, camp, recovery, practice. Like if he did, he would have beat out Jeff Okudah for this job, but still fascinated. I thought the rookie tape showed a lot of promise. And then they do have actually some just interesting names, considering this opportunity for the CB3 spot might open back up. Tavier Thomas was a really good slot corner for the Texans. Tampa signed him last year, and he didn't get out there too much, but I have seen good tape from him. Physical player with a lot of speed. Honestly, like if Jeff Okudah really struggles and they just want to make Tavier Thomas their slot corner, I think that could prove to be a nice insurance policy here and a nice pickup for this team. And then some other interesting guys that I liked in the draft. Dwight McGlothern was an undrafted pickup last year. Hardly played here, but was a fourth-round grade, I think, for me coming out of Arkansas. Good ball skills, some size and speed, even if he's a little bit more of a stiffer player. And then Ambry Thomas, very kind of twitchy athlete that's been wildly inconsistent in the time that he's played, but I still think there's some traits there that could be unlocked. And honestly, I'm more fascinated in those other four names than I am in Jeff Okudah. We'll see how that plays out, obviously, but that's just kind of my spin on it. But then we got to talk about these safeties, and there are three starting safeties here. So you got Harrison Smith. Very little to add on Harrison Smith at 36 years old. He is one of the smartest players in the NFL, always has been, but he's just got so much time on task. He's seeing everything. Always, coverage sound in terms of assignments. Just doesn't have the twitch to be a playmaker on the back end. And even as a run defender, getting into the right position at all times, crossing blockers' faces and chasing backs down on the backside. Even some of his missed tackle rates have come up with his age, which is all, totally understandable. I think we're talking about a Hall of Fame player here that has nothing left to prove, but wants to get that ring and sees the opportunity for this team to do that. So he'll turn 37 at the end of the season. Pretty damn insane for a safety his age to still be a pretty solid player. You're not going to get a ton of impact from him, but he's not going to be a problem either. And then you got Josh Metellus. I feel like we've already kind of broken him down in what he does a lot of the, in many ways. He is to me an elite run defending safety. We described him as a solid run defending linebacker. He's not a linebacker. He is a safety. So when he is playing that strong safety role, taking on tight ends, meeting bubble screens and making an impact in that slot position, or even if he is playing a deeper alignment, coming downhill and finishing tackles, elite run defense from Josh Metellus. So if we're talking about how his rating impacts our grade of the secondary, he's an okay coverage safety, just okay. He's just not this crazy athlete or crazy instincts or anything like that. But you do see their DB run support grade as a team is tied for first in that first tier with 8 other teams. Metellus is the core reason for that. And their ability to be in that kind of big nickel look with him as half DB, half linebacker. Like we said, you need the right personnel if you're going to do that, to have the right balance of a linebacker / safety that can be part linebacker and part DB. Super versatile, huge linchpin for this defense. And arguably the most important player scheme-wise for what they do, especially with how they craft their fronts. But then enter Theo Jackson. And this is the player, I did put the wild card icon on him as an individual player here. because they're taking a leap of faith on him. They give him a 3-year, $9 million contract, kind of a sneaky little, like, we're betting on you 3-year deal. He's been mostly a special teamer here. He's played very limited snaps when there's been opportunities, but just 79 snaps in 10 games played last year. So, total wild card in the sense of what can he be? 6th round pick out of Tennessee in the 2022 draft that clearly they have enjoyed his development, and how much of the Cam Bynum role they think he can handle is going to really dictate what they can do schematically. You look back at last year, Bynum, Smith, and Metellus all played 90% of their snaps. And the reason they're able to do that, of course, is Metellus is spending so much time as a slot corner and a linebacker in some of their other different formations that we've talked so much about. Do they see Theo Jackson as a 1,000 plus snap player on the back end and a true starter in that Cam Bynum role and just kind of roll forward with it? That's a big deal, because what that means when they do that is that's when you're able to take Jeff Okudah off the field and not have to worry about that cornerback depth as much, or that third starting corner rather, as much. And that's where you get the most out of Josh Metellus, because if they don't love what Theo Jackson is doing on the back end, they are inevitably going to have to ask Josh Metellus to play a lot more deep safety for them. And that is not how you want to use Josh Metellus. He is actually below average, in my opinion, as just a deep safety, especially from a coverage standpoint. He's much better taking out tight ends and playing those hook zones and playing towards the flat. So if he can play, they can resume what they did last year. Theoretically speaking, he's got a similar kind of more lengthy cornerback-esque build like Cam Bynum, 6'2", 200 pounds. He's tackled well. Again, it is a bet on what they've seen from him internally and in very minimal snaps. So I'm cautiously optimistic that he's going to be just fine. Safety is a position, especially for guys that you've been kind of grooming for a few years here. Like, it's a position that you can certainly develop, and it's not like he's lacking traits or work ethic or physicality. It's just he hasn't played much. So that's going to be a big deal, what they can get from him. He's kind of the linchpin to the linchpin. His existence is what allows you to keep Josh Metellus in that critical role for this scheme. So there's your 3 starters. We already ran through the cornerback depth. You've got really one safety name still worth mentioning, Jay Ward, heading into year 2 as a 4th round pick. He also has potential, a lot of speed and playmaking skills coming out of LSU. Played a lot of nickel for them. So, they don't need to count on him, but he's got a chance to develop as well here. Maybe someday could be their Harrison Smith replacement. I think he's got the balance as an overall physical build to do that. So that's probably a, hopeful projection for him, but not necessarily a guy that's generated a ton of buzz in his time here. And he was actually 2023 4th round pick, not last year. Just as hardly played, so I kind of forgot when he came into the league here. But I will say the fact that their depth is all undrafted, like complete flyers, Khalif Halasi, Gervarius Owens, Michael Powell, I think that's at least some bit of an endorsement that they like Jay Ward as a 4th safety, and that he could step in if the opportunity did present itself. It's just they've had so many safeties here that you can understand why he hasn't played, right? You've had, even with Theo Jackson in there, you've had 4 other names ahead of him, so it's tough. But yeah, that rounds out your secondary. Again, they're just hoping they can be smart, solid, physical, and multiple on the back end, not necessarily shut down or overly dynamic. But it's not enough to keep this defense outside of the top 10 or top 6 in this case. I have them right now ranking as our 6th overall defense. Depending where you look, they were the number 1 defense in the NFL last year. Again, that's Brian Flores working miracles. I don't think anybody's going to tell you this is the best defensive roster in the league, but it is getting better and better on paper. And if a couple of these question marks go the right way, it's not like they have to get much better than the 6th ranked defense, but they could absolutely get back to being, in the conversation for who the best defense in the NFL is. If those veteran pass rushers can get back to the best version of themselves. If some of those questions in the secondary fall in, that would be your avenue to getting that done. And then we can take a look at the special teams here. So the Vikings came out smack dab in the middle of the league, 16th, for overall special teams with a B- grade. You got the young Will Reichard, who was very accurate in his first year. Not the biggest leg, but very accurate. Ryan Wright's a very solid young punter. They got a lot of questions at returner. Brandon Powell, who did their punts, is no longer with the team, so probably going to be a lot of Ty Felton. We'll see how he can do there. But that's probably your biggest question mark is returner for the Vikings, a team that has a very good legacy of finding good returners, from Kene Nwangwu to Percy Harvin to, of course, Cordero Patterson. But yes, smack dab, down the road, middle of the league, special teams. All right, before we get into our team summary and then take a look at the schedule and my win total projections for the Vikings, I'm going to welcome in the wonderful Arif Hasan for this interview about the Vikings. And if you guys want to check out Arif's work, check out the Wide Left Substack. Genuinely some of the best writing you will see over on that platform. And he's got some other very talented people in the industry putting work up there as well. But yeah, welcome in, Arif Hasan. Arif, welcome back to the Vikings Deep Dive. Year 6, my friend. I was letting you know before we hit record here, you were the longest tenured guest. So got to keep the streak going. It's great to have you back. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. What does the SNL have? The 5 Timers Club? I'm in elite company, which is just myself, I think. I guess.
Yeah, we'll have to send you like a badge or something. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, you can flaunt it around town.
For sure.
All right. Well, we definitely got to talk some JJ McCarthy. If you ask anybody in Minnesota, they all think he's already the GOAT. It's already established.
He's the greatest quarterback you've ever seen. Man, you have no idea.
Yeah, I wanted to get your stock check on him, what your opinions on McCarthy are. So I've got a couple of fun ways to ask you about him. First way is kind of like a fill in the blank here. So I just wanted to say JJ McCarthy's biggest strength is blank. Take it from there.
I would say situational awareness, and I'm going to kind of wrap up like poise a little bit into that, which is, I think that he's got a really good understanding of like down and distance, 2-minute, kind of what he needs to do in order to get the job done, which is like a pretty significant switch from somebody like Kirk Cousins, pre-Kevin O'Connell, Kirk Cousins anyway, where he would just take whatever the defense gave him with no regard for like why they might give him that.
Mm-hmm.
and
sliding on, a yard short of the
right.
first down. Yeah.
Outstanding at being a yard short. Just, yeah. But yeah, he's done a really great job in college and in the preseason. That's fine. We don't have like a ton to work off of here, but in the college and the preseason, to generate, conversions on 3rd down, to generate, 4th down, to know that, and this is one thing that you tend to see a little bit more about year 3, year 5 of a quarterback more than in year 1 or 2, which is, it's 3rd and 11 and you're just outside of field goal range. You can just grab 6 yards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And grab that field goal. And it's pretty tough for a younger quarterback to do that. And that just seems to be kind of intuitive for him. And I think maybe, playing at Michigan where, it's like run dominant, you got Jim Harbaugh. That probably kind of helps where it's like, you don't have to win every play. And that's kind of given him that. But I think just overall, he kind of knows when to dial it up or down. He's pretty decent in terms of pocket presence. I wouldn't say his ability to sense pressure is up there elite, like with like a Mahomes or anything like that. But I would say he doesn't buckle under pressure, right?
Totally.
He takes it on and throws into contact and stuff like that. So for me, I think that would be his biggest strength.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout out too. And I think that leans similar to like what I would say too. I think when he did have those big 3rd and long situations at Michigan, which they did a great job keeping him out of it, that's when he really turned it on. So yeah, I like the what you said, turn it on, buckle it down a little bit on, taking field goals too. So awesome. All right. What about his biggest weakness? JJ McCarthy's biggest area for improvement is blank.
The cop-out answer here is experience, right? But I think I think we want to make it traits based, right? I think
Yes.
I think probably ball location. And I say that knowing that kind of his scouting report and the way that he looked at Michigan, I would say probably the biggest weakness was actually the lack of touch.
Hmm.
But if you followed any Vikings media about JJ McCarthy at all this year, that's like the one thing that they've been talking about the whole time, which is getting him to layer the football, effective touch, kind of figuring out the velocity with which he should approach the velocity and the trajectory of the ball for each kind of situation. And that has been kind of the primary, kind of area of analysis, both for the Vikings internally and then also the beat writers, because they've just been telling the beat writers this. And so the beat writers kind of look for it. And I would argue, based off of what we've seen in the preseason, based off of what, I've heard about in camp or what videos have been shared in camp, that has improved pretty significantly to the point where I'm very comfortable with that, provisionally, right? We don't have regular season data on him yet. Um,
Totally.
but I would say that he hasn't really improved his ball location. Like I'd say he's a broadly accurate quarterback. He gets the ball to his receivers. He has a really low turnover worthy play rate in college and in the preseason. And it seems like in camp, he doesn't throw the ball in an interceptable way, but he doesn't enable or maximize his receivers, make the catch easier, right? We talk a lot about, quarterback supporting cast. We talk about drop rate a lot when we do that. And I think that that's a totally valid method of analysis. But one thing that will impact drop rate is if you throw a catchable ball for your
Hmm.
receiver. And I don't know that he's quite there yet. I don't know that he's, we saw him like in the first preseason game, we saw him convert on a mesh rail where he threw ahead of his receiver. I think it was Jordan Addison for a first down conversion, right? And that's great. That's the good ball location that you're looking for. You want him to throw right ahead of the receiver in that situation, but he's not always throwing. In fact, just earlier that drive, he threw kind of behind Addison on a sideline throw. That's exactly where you don't want it.
Hmm.
I mean, you watch the Packers, you know exactly how you got to throw those sideline throws.
I thought that was going towards a you watch the Packers, you see Jordan Love misses receivers all the time. I thought
No,
that's where
no,
that was
no.
going.
This was an Aaron
This was
Rodgers
a
shout out.
positive one for
Yeah,
Aaron Rodgers. Okay,
yeah,
thank you, thank you.
yeah. No, we'll throw some love digs in there soon.
Okay,
But
okay.
um, but no, like he's not always nailing kind of the best place to put the ball in order to increase yak, in order to reduce the likelihood of a contested catch, in order to throw a catchable ball. And I think that that's probably going to be one of the primary limiting factors that's still like very correctable for him, as
Mhm.
opposed to something that's, not as correctable that might be limiting something like arm strength, which I think he has great arm strength, but like as an example of something that's like pretty difficult to correct, that would
Sure.
be one. I think he can fix that. I think that's not the focus right now.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So this one's a little bit more of an open-ended, tougher question, but I've asked this to some guests in the past, and it's kind of a fun way to look at a young quarterback that we don't really know how it's gonna turn out. I think I asked EJ Snyder about this with Caleb Williams heading into his rookie season, but kind of looking at his first season, his rookie
Right.
season, kind of on
Yeah.
a bell curve where you have like your dream scenario, kind of your 95th percentile best case for JJ McCarthy this year, your middle median 50% outcome, and then kind of the bad like fifth percentile outcome. What do each of those different landmarks kind of look like to you? And I'll let you kind of decide if you want to answer that by like raw stats or just his ranking inside the league, or however looks for you.
So when you texted me this question, I liked it so much that I just spent time on Pro Football Reference, just going through stat head, being like, let's take a look at all of these first, second year
All
quarterbacks.
right. All right.
So I like this a lot. And I agree. I think this is a great way to look at kind of quarterbacks. So first thing to keep in mind is that first and second year quarterbacks are below average quarterbacks, right?
Hmm.
So a 50% outcome is not average in the league. And I think that's good. Like, I think if you ask a lot of people that question, this is me pumping myself up. If you ask a lot of people that question, they're gonna say the 50% outcome is like average or above average, and that's not really true. So let me start there just to kind of anchor us, and then I'll move up and then down. So the
Hmm.
50% outcome for me is actually something like Tua Tagovailoa's second year or Teddy Bridgewater's 2015,
Okay.
where it's a lot it's kind of play action dominant, right? It's kind of relying on the scheme to enable what they're doing, and they're not actually doing a really great job of avoiding turnover-worthy plays. But there's a lot there that you like. It's not a ton of deep throwing, right? It's not a ton of explosive playmaking, but there's a ton there that you like. A lot of poise from both of them, even though they did take a lot of sacks. And a lot of like we figure out kind of ways to maximize the check down until we take our play action deep shot. And hopefully
Mhm.
we've got the supporting cast to do that, which, you know, Teddy didn't super have that in 2015. It wasn't until he got hurt that the supporting cast was great. And
Yeah.
Tua didn't super have that until also McDaniel arrived. But JJ definitely, we can't make any excuses for that supporting cast, right? JJ
Yeah.
super has that. And so, you know, the deep shots, maybe the statistics will look a little bit better than those guys. But for the most part, those are guys that after those years, you're like, well, I see it. I don't know that that's going to turn it. And this is, I'm a huge Teddy fan, so it kind of hurts me to even
Yeah.
diminish him like this. But, you know, you see it, but you don't know that it's going to turn into anything where you're like, we're consistent playoff performers or anything like that. So that's the median outcome, a little bit below average compared to the league in terms of output and production. But if you've got a great defense, which Teddy did. I mean, he had a good defense. Again, not until, you
Mhm.
know, 17, 18, 19. But then you can take that kind of team to the playoffs with that offense. So that's the median outcome for me. I think kind of the high level outcome would be something like 2016 Dak, which is, I mean, that's maybe that's even above 95, right? But that's I think a really great outcome. CJ Stroud, you know, first or
Yeah.
second year, where I think he's a little bit more athletic than Stroud, right? But like, you know, the Dak Stroud area where again, they're not like Jameis Winston deep ball, whatever, right? But they're making big plays, they're throwing it for big gains, but they're really careful about picking their spots. Both Stroud and Prescott had really low turnover worthy throw percentages in those years that I'm talking about. They were able to really utilize the outstanding supporting cast that they had, especially in that
Mhm.
receiving core. And they weren't as reliant on stuff like play action. They created a lot of their own offense and were really cognizant of like we were talking about with McCarthy, you know, third downs and game winning drive. I think Stroud had like an outstanding game winning drive
Yeah.
um, year. So like I think like that and Dak's 2016 was, well, the Cowboys put him in those situations, but you know, Dak had a really good kind of fourth quarter comeback year there too. And so I think you see all of that, you see big plays, you see explosiveness, but it's really not as big play dependent as the highlights from those seasons would tell you. It's a lot of consistency, pretty high success rate, a lot of taking care of the ball, and a lot of
Mhm.
kind of using the supporting cast and maximizing it. And then at the bottom end, I think actually the quarterback that might back him up, Sam Howell's like lone,
Mm.
you know, year in Washington. I think it's the second year in the league, where God, you're taking sacks all the time, and you're not even making big plays to make up for it. He had a really low depth of target. He held onto the ball really long. He loved to scramble around for God knows what reason.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and again, like, you know, I think that McCarthy has a stronger arm than Tua or Teddy, but I think that, you know, we know with Alex Smith that like a strong arm doesn't mean you throw it deep, right?
Yep.
And I think Sam Howell is a pretty good example of that. He's got a reasonably strong arm and he doesn't do jack with it.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of year is there. I think maybe if you wanted to get real low, Zach Wilson was kind of similar too, where you're just running around. Neither of them, neither Howell nor Wilson took care of the ball. They had really high interception rates or turnover worthy play rates. They had really high sack rates. They induced a lot of pressure by holding on. They both had the athleticism that McCarthy has, but they didn't use it very kind of intelligently. And so I think that that's kind of the low end where you take a lot of risks, you don't get a lot of payoff for it, but you do get the downside of those risks.
Yeah. Very well done, my friend. I think we need to just copy and paste that, send that to Vikings fans and level out the expectations a little bit. I think that's
dude,
like spot
dude,
on. I agree.
they love him here, man. He's like, if he doesn't make a Pro Bowl, people are gonna be mad.
I know it's pretty crazy. Like for anybody watching that doesn't live around here, it's you wouldn't believe like the hype for a guy that
Guy hasn't
has
played a
never
snap.
played.
The only notable thing he's done in the NFL is get egregiously hurt.
Well, that's what happens when you get drafted to a Minnesota sports team.
Yeah, I can't
Unfortunately,
contest that, man. That's
yeah, whatever sport you play, it doesn't really matter. All All right, so let's branch out to some of the other aspects of the team. I mean, the beauty of this team is like there really aren't a ton of questions roster wise that aren't health related. But I wanted to get your reactions to the Donovan Jackson pick and what your expectations are for him here in year one at left guard.
Yeah, I didn't super love the pick, mostly for value. I don't think that he's like a bad player or anything like that, but he didn't strike me. And maybe this is just because he played too many snaps at left tackle, which is just not the position you should be playing in
Mhm.
college. But I didn't love the pick. There just wasn't a ton of guard worthy players left on the board, and you couldn't trade down because now it's been essentially confirmed Houston was going to take him if Minnesota didn't. So it's a really difficult one to kind of figure out. Are you that enamored with somebody like Savaiinea, who went to Miami like at the top of the second round? That's basically your other option. I mean, I like him more than Aaron Banks. I'll give myself that. But uh, we're talking about left guard acquisitions in the offseason,
Hey.
you know?
God. Dude, I just did the Packers deep dive last week. I had forgotten about that. You know, I was moving on with my week, and you just ruined my week. Thank you.
But no, I like him a lot. He is a super athlete. It's kind of fun because like his big highlight in college, I think, is the 20-yard. He's blocking on a screen and he's going 20 miles per hour, which is just nuts for a
That's
guy his
crazy.
size, right? And like 2 practices ago, there's a highlight going or 3 practices ago against the Patriots. There's a highlight going around of a screen to Aaron Jones, and he takes out like 3 Patriots. And by takes out, I mean like it's a joint practice, right? It's not against the Vikings. It's like he's decking them.
Yeah.
and you're like, okay, great. I mean, that's 5% of plays, but great. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, hey, that high end is good to see for sure.
Yeah. The low end isn't wonderful. We saw it in the preseason. Some of that I'm not like crazy concerned about. There were 2 reps where he just hit the ground, and that's really alarming because like balance to me is one of the critical traits that you need to have. But both of those instances, he's like tripping over another offensive lineman. And so I think that mostly will resolve itself. Like you just got to figure out your footwork so that doesn't happen. Sometimes, like when you get an Ed Ingram, that never resolves itself. He's tripping other people, but like, he's just like the feet are going everywhere, right? I don't think that that's a huge concern, but I don't think even when you exclude that, I don't think that he played all that well in his limited preseason snaps. And I think a lot of that is kind of adjusting to the speed of the game. His eyes are moving quickly, right? He's picking up stunts and blitzes, and which I'm so glad we do this in the preseason now for people who haven't like been around that long.
Yeah.
Like in the preseason,
The
they just
vanilla blitzes and
yeah, they would almost never blitz, they would never stunt, and you're like, what are we doing? But now we do it all the time, and so that allows us to see like Donovan Jackson do a really good job picking up his assignments, but he's not moving his hands or his feet as quickly as he is in college. And to me, that just means I think he's catching up. I think that his brain has to figure out kind of everything that needs to be done. There's a higher cognitive load for what he needs to do here than what he did at Ohio State. And so I think that's probably what's happening. And if that continues to happen, he's going to be probably a 25th percentile guard, probably not as bad as like Garrett Bradbury was at center or anything like that.
Sure.
But that I'm really worried about kind of what that's going to look like early on. But I think he's a really good run blocker. I think, like I said, he's going to be fun to watch on screens. And I think what we saw of him at guard for like the 4 games he played at guard in college, and then also the year before that, shows us he is a pretty reasonably decent pass protector, right? Like I never envision, like if we're doing 95%, I'm never envisioning like a Zach Martin, Quentin Nelson type of player for this guy, right? But I think that he could be pretty good, right? We're not seeing it yet. And I think that was kind of one of the things that bothered me a little bit about picking him, even if it was kind of late-ish in the first round, picking him in the first round. I thought maybe because there weren't really great top of the second round guard options, but yeah, I didn't super love the pick, but I think it's a huge upgrade for the line. I think he's better than Blake Frankel.
Sure.
So
yeah, it goes back to what you said about the like an average like 50th percentile year for a rookie quarterback. It's like, okay, just because he's technically Donovan Jackson, a high floor guard, doesn't mean he's a good NFL starting guard as a rookie, like necessarily. So yeah, it was definitely a little bit early for me as well. But hopefully he's solid. All right, I want to get kind of your sense of just the like where we're at, like buzz level with these two veteran D tackles coming in, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave. Honestly, I haven't heard too much, but I'm not following things as closely as you are. So like both these guys coming off injuries. This is a D-line position that the Vikes needed a lot of help at. Like, are you expecting kind of like massive contributions from them? Are you more pump the brakes? Where's the kind of hype meter with these two guys?
No one's talking about them, which I find really fascinating because like when they were signed, people were like really and I think appropriately, right? Really hyped up.
Yeah.
Like their names, I think, are bigger than the talent level that they'll bring this year, just kind of given their age and their injury history and kind of what they specialize in and stuff like that. But they're very good players, and the Vikings had a lot of issues surrounding Harrison Phillips with interior D-line talent, and I think that this is going to be kind of big. And I asked around a little bit about them. And you know, it's you get the kind of they look good, right? Which doesn't tell you much. They look good. But they've been fully healthy. They've been participating in all practices. I guess they've been beating the brakes off the Patriots interior O-line, but have you seen it? I don't. That doesn't tell me much.
No.
For example, Garrett Bradbury is on that line. Yeah.
And I don't think he's gonna start, which is funny. He's gonna lose it out to a rookie. Yeah.
Which is crazy. But so they've been beating the brakes off of them, which, you know, I would hope for that at least. So that's a start. But the Vikings backups have mostly been in there in practice because it's been Donovan Jackson and then two backups because Ryan Kelly was recovering a little bit and then Will Fries only recently returned too. So you had, you know, and they were beating up on Michael Jerkins or whoever, right? Like great. But no, I mean, like there is a little bit of excitement. I think the problem here is not that they're not playing well or up to expectations, but more that Jonathan Grenard has like consumed all of the headlines as it regards, you know, performance on the defensive line. He is having this stunning, incredible, outstanding camp. And again, Christian Darrisaw is not healthy, right? So he's not really out there. He's started to practice in 11s, and we have seen Grenard against him, and Grenard has looked good against him. And then, like, he goes up against, like, Verdarian Lowe in joint practices.
Yeah.
Okay. But, like, even so, like, people are talking about how amazing. And so that's kind of taking all of the oxygen out of our ability to evaluate all these other guys.
Sure.
I've heard very little about Tyrion Ingram Dawkins. I've heard very little about Harrison Phillips. I've heard very little bit about, like, Andrew Van Ginkel, and people are super interested in Dallas Turner. So you hear a little bit about him, but honestly, not as much as you'd expect because he's in not a same situation as JJ. He did play last year, but everyone's kind of hoping for that year 2 breakout for him because he was behind these 2 Pro Bowlers, right? And so people want to talk about it, and they don't. They're only talking about Jonathan Grenard and how amazing he is. So I don't get a bunch of a read on Allen or Hargrave or anything like that.
Yeah. Ugh. It just drives me so crazy. Like look at who these guys are going against before you try to like gas up all these, like with all due respect to the Marcus Bowe crowd with the Giants, but that's been like one of the most hyped up players. And every time I see a clip, he's going against like an undrafted guy that wasn't even like my question on Marcus Bowe is like, can he stop the bull rush? Because the dude had one of the worst anchors I've seen. And
he has the weirdest stance it's like in college football. I'm not surprised he's bad against bull rushers. He looks crazy when he's out there.
Yeah, I mean he looks like he's filled out like a running back. Yeah. All right. So the only other like roster question I have for you is the CB3 spot. I've seen a lot of Jeff Okudah. Is that where we're going right now, or you know where are you kind of expecting to land with CB3?
Yeah, it's former 3rd overall pick Jeff. It's a 3rd overall, but don't worry about it. It's
that draft status is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Is he on his 4th team?
It's all right. Last time he was in the NFC North, he was awesome, right?
I don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. But no, it's probably Jeff Okudah. It seems like that he's kind of won the job outright. And there's been a lot of kind of features on him that have come out a little bit. So 3-4 different places have done like pretty, not, I'm going to say deep dives, but pretty extensive, like looks into Okudah, like, hey, check out your CP3 kind of human interest stories. And a lot of them kind of focus on like what the Vikings believe they see in him and what they believe, and kind of how he's going to change his approach or what works for him here that didn't work in Atlanta, I want to say. And I guess technically Houston, but he played like 77 snaps for them. So.
Yeah.
But and there are some like interesting technical details there. Like, for example, the Vikings are like a very unique coverage team in that they're very like blitz dominant, but very zone heavy within that, right? And it's not like a traditional zone blitz where you abandon a lot of your coverage defenders for like defensive linemen dropping in, and it's a gimmick on a blitz. It's a base coverage, the zone stuff. And Okudah's been playing a ton of man coverage over his career, and he doesn't, as like a super athlete, he kind of trusts himself a little bit too much, and he's played a lot of press man in particular, and he doesn't really jam all that much, and he just waits for the receiver to declare, and then he'll just choose to recover or whatever, which is a choice, I guess, and it turns out not a good one for him. And it sounds like that's not really the approach the Vikings are going to take with him, and I don't know if that's going to work. I am just going to remain skeptical, but there's a bunch of quotes out there about how the Vikings believe in him, how Brian Flores saw something in him, about how he studied the playbook before he ever even signed with the team. And okay, I'm going to wait until the season starts, and then it's probably going to be bad. But he's the CB3. I mean, like, you don't got to worry about it because, like, everyone knows that the edge rushers here get the picks. Andrew Van Ginkel's going to get, 2-3 pick sixes, one of them off of Love, of course. Grenard was really upset.
There you go. You got your love flowing.
Yeah. Grenard was really upset because Van Ginkel got all the picks, and he's like, I'm going to get 2-3 picks this year, which, okay, sure. I believe you.
Dallas Turner got one on Geno, right?
Yeah.
Yep. That's funny.
So don't worry about it. It's the edge rushers. They'll take care of all that production for you.
Absolutely. All right. A couple of quick hitting questions here. Some superbly? Is that
you wrote superbly, and I think you meant superlative.
Superlative. Yeah, I was looking at this. I was like, I am like not
hyperbole, and you just combined the two. And I was like, I'm gonna let him tell me what that means. But I guess you didn't know.
Yeah, we call those TFG-isms on this channel. My English is not the best. Okay, thank you. Superlative awards. I wrote down superbly. Something.
Yeah, I was like Super Bowl.
I was looking at it, I was like, that is not the word, but Arif is gonna know what I'm talking about. Okay, superlative. Thank you. We bring in the smart people here. So anyway, who's your biggest breakout player for the Vikings? Not including JJ McCarthy for these, because that's a cheat.
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna say Addison probably already broke out. I'm gonna say Theo Jackson. It's kind of a deeper cut here, but he's gonna get the number of snaps that Josh Metellus got last year, who I would characterize.
He's playing the Bynum role, right?
Yeah, I think he's playing the Bynum role. It's been kind of, I don't know. It's been kind of like inconclusive. They've been kind of ambiguous about it, but I hope to God Metellus is not playing the Bynum role. So that would mean that Theo Jackson would be. And I think that athletically and build wise, that makes more sense for Theo Jackson. But in terms of number of snaps, I think he's going to play closer to Metellus's number of snaps as last year. I don't think that he's going to immediately start for like $6 million a year. Like Metellus just got a $14 million extension, right? So I think Metellus and Harrison Smith are going to play the vast majority of snaps, and a lot of times it's still going to result in Metellus being in the box, and maybe you'll have O'Connor do invert stuff and play safety. Like, you're going to have weird ass stuff. That's what the team does. But Theo Jackson, I think, is going to kind of emerge as somebody that they've loved a lot in his limited play last year, and what they've seen in practices. And they gave him a surprising extension given the amount of playtime that he's had. But I looked over what he did last year; it was really good. So I'm gonna nail it as Theo Jackson. I'm gonna refuse to pick a corner. I feel like there's that's just
Yeah.
doubling down on how ominous that position is.
Sure.
Theo Jackson breakout.
All right. So then our other award here would go to the kind of the biggest wild card / critical variable for this team. Again, outside of JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, Jeff Okudah. It's like that guy's playing a ton of snaps.
Mhm.
And for better or worse, probably worse. But if the Vikings are right, and they've been right on a lot of these defensive
Mhm.
players, if the Vikings are right, that's going to turn out real solid. I think they got more out of Stephon Gilmore than he could have reasonably expected, given what he did the year prior and the level of speed and athleticism he had. They got way more out of Shaq Griffin than he'd had in like the previous 3 years of his career, right? Also a guy who only had like 70 odd snaps for the Texans, just weirdly enough.
Yeah.
Um,
Keep signing the Texans CV4 every year until it stops working.
yeah, right, exactly. If it ain't broke, right?
Yeah.
But but I think that there's like reasons to think like Okudah could, maybe not live up to like this top 5 overall hype or whatever, but live up to the evaluation that made him a first rounder, right?
Mhm.
And that happens really rarely. I just want to emphasize guys on their 3rd or 4th team who are former first rounders, a phrase you should be terrified of, rarely turn in the amount of talent that you'd expect a 2nd or 3rd rounder to have, right? And even in situations where they end up featuring, like Laquan Treadwell once led the Jaguars in receiving yardage. Look it up, I promise.
That's insane.
Yeah. No one thought Laquan Treadwell was a wide receiver 1, 2, or 3. It's just that's what the Jaguars were, right?
Yeah.
And so
That
it
had to be
happens.
before they gave Christian Kirk $23 million a year.
I think that's why they were like, this is okay. Get over here. I don't care how much you want to make. This is, but yeah,
Oh man.
it's like our receivers are Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, right? That was the response to that. But yeah, like it rarely turns out that this guy who's been on like 4 different teams or whatever, former first, like, you're not going to likely see that. So I don't want to like emphasize that too much, but there are a lot of reasons to trust, the Vikings defensive brain trust here. So I'm going to say Okudah is kind of the biggest wild card, and if he has a good year, it's hard for me to envision the Vikings as anything but a top 3 defense, right? Like that he's the weak link, right? And so and we don't know how Theo Jackson's going to. There's like a ton of other, but like he's the biggest concern, and I think there's a lot of variability in his potential outcomes.
Yeah. All right, one more actually, and this one's fun. Defensive MVP, which I think is fun for the Vikings because the MVP question is usually super obvious for a lot of units, but for them it could be a huge number of different guys. So who would you go for there?
Man, I think the sneaky I know ball pick for last year was Blake Cashman.
Yes, thank you.
But I think this and Blake Cashman's going to continue to be outstandingly important to this defense. I don't want to diminish that, but I think this year it's going to be Grenard. I think, yeah, he's been beating up on the Vidarian Lows of the world, and that's been generating a lot of camp hype and whatever. But he's genuinely a really excellent player, really outstanding player, and it's pretty clear at this point that the Vikings live with what happens up front more than what happens in the back 7 or back 4 or however many they're keeping back throughout whatever down we're in. So I think that you need to generate that pressure. That pressure ideally doesn't come just from blitzers. Grenard has the talent and the capability. I think they're indexing all of their defensive looks around what he can do. And so I think a lot of it's going to be produced around Grenard. So to me, he's going to be the defensive MVP next year.
Yeah, and they basically like double the amount of percent they had on like 4-man rushes last year, even if they were showing a bunch of blitzes. Wasn't that kind of a big deal? Was the fact that they could actually win with 4 occasionally?
Yeah, but like you got to understand the year before they had the fewest 4-man rushes in the NFL by like an enormous margin.
Yeah,
so doubling that
to be like close to it. It had to be close to a historic.
Yeah, I mean, like I wish we had stats going back because, like,
Yeah.
I think you're right because they led the league in both 6 and 3-man rushes,
Right.
and they were pretty high up there in 5 too.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they did, and I think a lot of that has to do with like investments that they've made up front, but also just like you can't live like that.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that they're moving. They like reduced their blitz rate from the historic one they had. I think there's like one other team in history that had a higher blitz rate than them. Might have been it wasn't a Greg Williams team. I think it's like one of those like Ravens,
Yeah.
Jets, Insano
A
teams.
Wink Martindale or a
Yeah,
Jeff Schwartz.
exactly.
Like it had to
Yeah.
be, one of those. Yeah.
But like, as far back as we have blitz data, they were like second or third historically, that
Crazy.
first year. In the second year, they were first in their blitz rate dropped by 20 points and they were still first in the NFL, like 40+%.
Oh, I love Brian Flores so goddamn much.
So crazy. Like there's a point in the middle of the
Uh,
season where the Broncos had a higher blitz rate, and I just feel like someone like told like he's like in a meeting, and then someone like walks in the meeting and whispers like a second blitz rate is hit, but like and he's like that's not right, and he ramped up the blitzes in the second
yeah.
half of the season. So that's where they live. They're going to be a high blitz rate team, but I think if you can win with 4, that's going to be kind of the focus that you have, especially because 4 high blitz rate teams, they have the lowest blitz rate on third down, right? They
Mhm.
want to win with 4 in those downs and keep some coverage back there. And so having Grenard, perform in those situations is going to be really critical.
Yeah. All right. I'm asking this to every guest. The over under for the Vikings is 8.5. And we're just keeping up a tally of the guest records. So where are you going?
Okay, I imagine this happens on ESPN all the time. I imagine, generally speaking, your guests trend over.
Yes. I think we have 2 unders.
Yeah, like it just I don't
Nice.
know.
Yeah.
You cover the team and you're like, well, they're better than 8.5, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. The quarterback is so unknown.
Mhm.
But I do believe that the defense will regress a lot less than people say. Plug. I wrote a piece over at Why Left Off Football about defensive regression and what FTN Fantasy said about defensive regression for the Vikings, which I think was a really well written piece in their almanac, and I just responded to that. I don't think the Vikings regress defensively as much as people say, and I think they've got good reasons for believing it. But I think you combine what I expect to be a top 6 defense, top 5 defense, probably, with a top half offense. That to me is more than 8.5 wins. It is a pretty difficult schedule. So I
Yeah.
get where like there's a ton of reasonable pushback on that, but they buy some back by being an elite international team, and they got 2 of those this year. So
Nice.
over 8.5.
Awesome. And yeah, one of the guests that did take the under is doing some writing for you over at the wide left. So James Foster did take the under on the Titans.
Yeah, it sounds
He's
like
bold
he's not a
enough.
huge Titans optimist. Yeah.
But yes, all of you guys can find some of the best writing in the NFL space imaginable over there. Arif is outstanding in that department. And once again, thank you, Arif. You're 6, keeping the streak alive. Thank you for coming on. Anything else you got before we get out of here?
Yeah, Jordan Love's overrated. Peace.
Okay. See ya. So huge thanks to Arif for joining us again. Always good for some good banter and some laughs. I hope you guys enjoyed the interview, but let's get into our team recap on this Vikings team. Summarize a lot of the stuff we broke down in this deep dive. So, I mean, the real narrative here is you look at the team splits on the Vikings, 6th on defense. You feel very good about what they're getting there. Just a few questions that could go right and get this to be the best defense in the league. That's in the range of outcomes for them. And that goes under the radar because so much of the attention is on this offense and JJ McCarthy. But as you guys know, like, we use a formula for this series, and the Vikings did not get a good rating for that ever important variable of quarterback. But despite that, the offense is still in such good shape with the weapons, with the O-line, with the coaching, that even if JJ McCarthy struggles, the offense still came out as our 14th ranking offense. But if JJ is good, I mean, this team absolutely could win the Super Bowl this year. Even if he's like the 20th quarterback, that would get them closer to being a top 10 offense paired with one of the best defenses in the league. It is all there for the Vikings to go out and get this done. Now, as we look at their schedule and their Vegas over-under, things are stacked up against them a little bit. Number one, Vegas actually has this team's over-under low, 9 wins, much lower than our last few teams here. Their Super Bowl odds actually are 10th to 13th. And their division odds, they are actually third in their division. I have the Vikings ahead of the Packers here in this series. The Vegas odds disagree there. So the gambling market's a little bit lower on Minnesota, and maybe this schedule is why the Vikings do have a very challenging schedule. It doesn't start horrible, but that's not great if the easy part of your schedule is the early part, because Addison's suspended for 3 games. Darrisaw is questionable for week 1. And J.J. McCarthy will be making his first few starts of his career. And then even if the opponents are quote-unquote more winnable, you are talking about international games, which just throw a wrinkle in everything. So you got at Chicago week 1, I think is a pick'em game. Atlanta, Cincinnati at home. And then you got Pittsburgh and Cleveland international, then your bye week. So it's like, it's not the easiest of starts, but you're hoping you walk out of that 3-2, 4-1 maybe. But then, holy crap, man, your next 4 weeks, you got Philly at the Chargers, at Detroit, and Baltimore. So through 10 weeks, your odds of being better than 500 are pretty tough. And then you're looking down the home stretch where it's just a lot of competitive, really NFC games. We know this division's a challenge. So you got your 2 Packers games, your Bears home game, and your Lions home game down the stretch. You got to go to Seattle, Sam Darnold revenge game. You got to host Jaden Daniels and the Commanders. You got to go to Dallas. It's a lot of tough games. And then even at the Giants with that D-line, like, I don't think it's ever going to be a cakewalk, though their season might be done at that point. You might get a diminished version of them. Maybe they're throwing Jackson Dart out there to see what he's got or something. I don't know. But the schedule's not easy, that's for sure. So I understand why the over-under is a little bit lower, paired, of course, with the skepticism of the young J.J. McCarthy. It's a polarizing team. I think if I'm betting this team, I would lean more towards the division odds at 3-1 basically, and the Super Bowl odds at 22-1, because I think that JJ McCarthy variable is so important that if he's pretty solid to good, like let's just stick with the 18th best quarterback in the NFL or the 20th best quarterback, which is probably like a 70th percentile best case scenario. If you go back to what we talked about with Arif there. Let's say we get a 70th percentile outcome. J.J. McCarthy is the 18th best quarterback in the league. You're going to go over 9 wins, but you're not just going to do that, right? Like the rest of this team is in a place where you're probably primed to compete for this division, and you're frankly in a position to win the Super Bowl. So I'd more swing for the boom or bust aspect of it if I'm betting on this team. Go Super Bowl, go division odds. I think both of those things are in their range of outcomes, but there's also the possibility that J.J. McCarthy just isn't that good. And this Vikings team's not going to be horrible. They're still going to push for that 9-win over-under, but betting it certainly becomes a lot harder. So that's where I'm at on Minnesota. I hope you guys enjoyed this deep dive. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with this team ranking, if you think I missed anything on this team. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments. Who do you think comes next? I do have to say, we're going to go a little bit out of order here. I have a guest interview lined up, and we are going to do the number 6 team before the number 7 team, just because we've had such a bad run of news coming in and overwriting a lot of the stuff we've said in these deep dives. And I've got family in town this weekend, so I want to get that done while I've got the interview scheduled. Anyway, we're going to go a little bit out of order there for the next deep dive. Got to do what we got to do here. But other than that, I really hope you guys enjoyed. Please do hit that like button on the way out. And I will see you for the next deep dive soon. Peace out.